order the Planning Commission meeting work session for August 10th, 2021. Do you need a roll call for the record?
I took everyone's name and it's being recorded. I think we're good.
Okay, great. So we're going to go right into residential design standards.
Excellent. Let me share my screen with you. Oh boy, let's see here. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Chair Simpson and Commissioners, Joy Chang, Senior Planner with the Planning Department. Tonight, the purpose of this work session is for the Planning Commission to provide comments to staff on the third draft of the code standards. And secondly, for staff to brief the commission on the city council work session and the comments received on the July 20th work session. And for staff to brief on the commission on the 2 public open houses that were held last week. And also the last would be accessory dwelling units code amendments. So what have we heard from the Planning Commission? When we first brought the residential design elements to you, staff provided a menu list of about 17 detailed design elements that could be chosen by the developer. The Planning Commission discussion identified that the development community would choose, of course, the easiest detailed design elements, and with that, direct the staff to modify some of these detailed design elements as by making them requirements. So the revised residential design standards have been modified per the Planning Commission direction, and we're going to be discussing them in the following slides. So as you can see here, the way that it is currently laid out, there are 3 required standards, 3 elements, elements 1, 2, and 3. Entry location, garage and off-street parking, and window or entrance doors. Then there's 5 additional elements that would be required. And the element 4A, each subsection, there needs to be 1 design element from each subsection of porches, 1 element from roof, 1 element from windows. In addition to that, element 4B, we require 2 additional detailed designs from either element 4A above or 4B below, which includes the building materials and other elements. So there's a total of 8 design elements that we will be requiring for every single residential building permit that gets submitted.
So Joy, before we move on, I want to pause and let the commission, we're not going to maybe discuss it right now. We'll probably get into depth later in the meeting, but this is the staff's proposal as presented at the open house and to the city council, but it is certainly not the end. So if a planning commissioner says, you know, this offends me in a way that I think I can propose a solution that makes it more straightforward or adds something that I feel is important, this is an opportunity to revamp it, even to the point of saying, I don't think we need 5 elements. I think we need to revisit something. So as we go through the process, if there is something that you see as egregious or complicated beyond the ability to forward it on to the city council the way it is, this is where we need to really raise your hand, stop the process, and revisit it to what it is. I mean, the staff has done a really good job in hearing what we've been saying and coming forth with a draft plan, but it doesn't it doesn't have to be the final version. So thank you for that.
So before you go on, Joy, can you swap your screen so we see the bigger vision? We're seeing the presenter mode.
Oh, I didn't know
Presentation
that.
mode.
Oh boy.
If you just go
Okay.
up to display settings, you should be able to swap it right up there at the top of your screen. And
Sorry.
switch screens. There you go.
Yes.
Thank you. Much better.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't. No one tells me these things because I see both of them. All right. So let's move on because there is going to be a slide that we are going to be discussing in regards to possible changes. So let's move on to the next one.
And that's
so
really good roll up, by the way. I just wanted to say I like that slide. It's a very good roll up summary.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And if we do need to get into the nitty gritty, I have additional slides that definitely has all the additional details per all those elements. But I do want to let you know that we did receive community comments the last 2 days. Very specifically, it is from Riverside Homes that have a current land use application that have received preliminary approval is in the Brookman area. So their key elements that they've identified is goalpost rule or vesting of the standards at the time of land use submittal. They're concerned that since they have already submitted a land use application, it should be vested at the time that they submitted that land use application versus us creating standards at this time and having them effective, the new year, and then they having to apply those standards. So I do want to let you know that our city attorney is looking into that. And so we will have more direction in regards to that goalpost rule. But they were also asking for additional design elements for us to consider. And as you can see, they're asking about glazing as far as the front door, window grids, 4-color paint scheme, decorative eave braces, belly band trim. So they're just adding these things where I do know that these are elements that they currently have already within their line that they do sell. So I will actually email you the specific emails that were received from Riverside Homes so that you guys can see, in addition to my summary, exactly what they identified. So for tonight, for consideration, we're asking the commission, are the residential design standards too prescriptive? Should they be modified or should we keep it as is proposed? I don't know, Jean, if you wanted to have the discussion now or for me to finish everything.
I think it would, I don't want to get stuck on it and not complete everything else. So I would like to, when we get to the meat and potatoes of actually going through and figuring out, are these the 5 right elements and are there enough criteria? I think it'd be appropriate to finish the presentation and then hit all the other things that the consultant said we were going to have to hit in our hearing the first time through.
Okay, so let's move forward just because, like I said, the next thing I believe is city council, what we heard from city council. So staff met with city council on July 20th, and also in attendance to represent the planning commission was Chair Simpson. They did ask the planning commission to consider the following for you to look at: landscaping, setbacks, garages, and off-street parking areas, and also what is considered a street when it's considering elevation, design element requirements. And then they also had city council work at the work session, also had other requests. So let me just jump into these so we can get through my presentation. So again, the landscaping discussion that they identified, it was identified that the proposed minimum landscape requirement is too low. This is exactly what we're proposing at this time. Anywhere from 10 to 20, depending on the specific land use designation. The mayor was asking, should front and rear yards be treated separately? And if so, how much do we care about the rear yard? And is there an ideal percentage? And he also identified that the front setback of 20 feet, what percentage of this is landscaping? Should it be at least 40%? So staff did do some initial draft layouts. This particular layout is a 5,300 square foot lot, 53 feet wide by 100 feet deep. Based on the example and the language that is in the code, it talks about the area based on the total lot square footage that is landscaped. And from this example, it identifies 460 square feet of landscaping, or that would be 9% of the total lot area. We also did different calculations for you, just because sometimes people don't actually do landscaping along their side yard setback. So the image to the right doesn't count the 300 square feet. And also sometimes they don't do full landscaping in their backyard. So we were just taking in consideration half of the backyard. So I've identified in the one to the left, all green areas, if landscape ends up being 40%, and then the one to the right is 19%. But if we're looking at just the front yard landscape area, the 200 and the 260 square feet in between the two driveways, and we actually calculated it based on the maximum width that we would allow, which is 30 feet. The landscape, the 200 and 260 equates 43% landscape area in the front setback. If we look at these examples.
Yeah, so can everyone hear me okay?
A little louder.
Sorry. So just to add a little context to this, for those that weren't at the meeting, I think the concern that came up is if you're looking at landscaping from a percentage of the total lot, right? Someone landscapes all their backyard, paves the entire front, lot line to lot line, and they meet the minimum requirement, but that's not really probably what we're looking for, right? And so we kind of went into a discussion then of like, well, why do we care if they landscape their backyard or their side yard? That's really their business. What we're really focused on is what the public impression should be, right? And so that kind of devolved into a conversation of maybe we should just focus on the percentage of the front yard that's landscaped. And so we're protecting against that fully paved, parking lot that someone wants to build. And we're leaving it up, a little bit more open-ended around, well, someone wants to put a pool in their backyard completely surrounded by concrete. Who cares, right? That doesn't affect anyone else other than the regular, whatever required setbacks from the property line or whatever. So that's kind of what drove this line of conversation.
Is there a definition of landscaping? If I wanted to do a drought-tolerant garden or, southwestern, desert motif, is that acceptable? Or are we just saying it can't be paved?
I am currently looking at that, so let me look at my code.
While you do that, is this I'm just thinking here, one of the things that we have is a 60% max frontage for garages. Typically driveways run into garages. And if this is 30 feet wide and the whole front of the building is 40 feet, we're already out of compliance here, as long as that's also the garage door. I mean, I'm not, could this happen where you have a small garage and just, like Councilor Scott said, just this massive parking lot? I mean, I guess
well,
it just doesn't seem common.
Yes, my house is that way because I have a 2-stall garage, but I have a driveway that goes up to the side for RV parking next to the house. So
Yeah,
I have a lot more concrete out front, but I also have a pretty wide lot. So I don't know if I'd meet 40%, but I have the rest of it is landscaped in the front. If I understand what landscaping is, it's grass and trees.
Right. So
I forgot about RV parking. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So just looking at our chapter 16.92, which is landscaping, is pretty much it's not defined within our definitions, but within that particular chapter, it says all areas not occupied by structures, paved roadways, walkways, or patios.
Okay. So we have a definition.
Yeah, and I worry about, this is kind of one of those things where you wish you could just say, make it look nice and everybody understands what you're saying. But, because I don't want to say, it has to be green space or the traditional lawn. And you know what I mean? That feels overly prescriptive to me.
I agree. And I also think telling people what they have to do in their side and backyards is difficult. My side yard, I don't get to because it's all the way around the other side and it has an air conditioner unit and, pretty much that's it. A narrow strip of grass and the rest of it is retaining wall because it's on a slope off to the side. So, that would be difficult. I think we should focus on what the minimum should be in the front yard and use our percentages based on that. Is anybody else, do we want to do a quick consensus vote and see if there's any other ideas towards that?
Before we go there, Jean, just real quick, my concern is with houses on cul-de-sacs where you have a very narrow front, which is going to be dominated by a driveway. I think in my house, I have my driveway's, 15 feet across, 18 feet across, whatever that is. I think I only have 1 foot of property on the outside of the driveway on one side and 5 feet on the other side. So,
but couldn't
this standard?
Yeah. So is there any way to make it just be a percentage of the front yard area? So that if you have you may just have strips like that, but that would still fill, well, I don't know, maybe that would make weird shaped driveways. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's leave it to staff to craft the language, but I agree because triangle shaped lots or cul-de-sac shaped lots would have to have an exception. So within the code, if we say 43% or 40% of the front yard needs to be landscaped, exceptions to this are irregular shaped lots, which we define in the code already. And that'd be, how's that work? Because you're right, I'm the first on a cul-de-sac, and the people up around don't have anything beside. Yeah, you're right.
So we'll take a look at that.
That's perfect.
And we can definitely bring you back some options.
No, so for the rest of the commission, any do we have a general consensus or concern about? Let's say, do we have a consensus about focusing the landscaping to the front yard only? I don't see anybody raising their hand or expressing concern.
Yes, I like the idea of giving people more freedom on the back and the sides. Front yard, yeah, I mean that's part of the design.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I'm probably not going to be as, I don't know. I'm just thinking this through, like how much to require. I mean, with parking being the problem that it is, people don't really use their front yards. It's kind of the balance between we want to give people some functionality for that third space or an RV spot or something like that, but still kind of look good neighborhood wise. I I don't know what the right percentage is if we're going that far to prescribe.
Yeah.
And then like to allow for that kind of extra parking with streets being what they are, but I don't want it to suck. So it's
well, and
hard to figure out.
Could a driveway to the RV be impervious surface so that it is not just concrete pad?
Yeah, and that's a good point. In my house, there's an extra parking space that's kind of gravel. And the reason being is it's an impossible place to keep anything alive. And so we put gravel there, but that's what I would be, according to our city definition, is landscaping.
And then the last piece would be accommodation for corner lots and what the percentage would be on that. So we can let staff come back to that at the next meeting. So Erica?
Oh, I'm going to come back to the next meeting actually and propose some different options. One of which could be a range, like a range of percentage. It could be, 20 to 40% or 15 to 35% of the front yard setback. So we can talk about that at the next meeting.
Okay. Commissioner Widola?
Thank you. I've got some heartburn on the methodology and the spirit of this because what we're telling the developers and the citizens is your private property that we can't see is yours to do with, but your private property that we can see, we get a say. And I don't want to get into the politics of any of that kind of stuff, but I want to make sure we're measured in how we communicate this because I can see a lot of people being really upset with us, with us defining, there's different layers of private property. Unless that's already settled law, which it could be. I'm ignorant on the subject.
But this is this because it's one of the required ones that they would have to meet, or is this one of many that they could meet? Because we also are going to try to encourage different types of housing, right? With different arrangements and multifamily and things like that, which would have kind of different vibes about them, right?
Right. Well, this would be a requirement they would have to have, just like they would have to meet a maximum height or their side yard setback or anything else, or their percent of, window glazing as we go forward. So it would be a requirement that they would have to meet.
Okay, all right, so that sells it for me though.
And this is new. This is largely new. There is a provision about existing, which I'm sure we'll get to, but this is all new. So, there's already, when you buy property, there's already, liens and things against your property that show up, easements, stuff like that you're buying, you own it subject to such things. And that's presumably factored into the value that you're willing to pay for it, what's there. And I do concur, I tend to be more to your property, but local governments, we're a local community, at the local level, I tend to think governments have a little bit more say in what their community looks like. If this was a state conversation, which is my problem with 2001, it's a different issue for me. Yeah. Not to go down the track you didn't want to go down, but, so this is a balancing point here. I get it. Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. Okay, so staff will definitely draft out some language and ponder this more as far as possible direction, and we'll bring it back to you at the next Planning Commission. So let's move forward to the second item that Council identified had to do with setbacks. It was identified that the front and rear setback should be 20 feet and side setback should be 5. There should be no exceptions or variances to side yard setbacks, but allow for a 5% variance to front and back setbacks. I basically identified what the existing standards are on this slide, where it's 14 feet on the higher densities and 20 feet on the lower densities districts.
So it's a 20. I thought it was a 20-foot setback on all front yards.
No, it's 14 feet on the, I have my code in front of me, so let me just look.
I
The
see.
driveway is still required to be set back 20 feet, but the house itself has varying setbacks.
The garage has a 20-foot setback.
Right.
Okay, I have it in front of me, and I had circled that as a question. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's something for you guys to consider in regards to, city council's direction in regards to requiring the standards as they are, as far as 20 feet and 5 feet, but also limiting variances.
Is anybody against taking council's direction and enforcing the setbacks?
My concern would be around removing exceptions and the variance options, to be considered. Yeah, we don't know what we don't know. What's going to come before the staff or whatever in the future. That if something comes up where it makes logical sense, but because the code says, sorry, no variances, no exceptions, we can't do anything. I don't know. That's why I think the variance process, or at least the exception process, is there for a reason. Doesn't mean we have to approve it, but it means that we can look at it and really weigh the logic of it.
Okay, and so a variance is at the staff level, and am I reading exception to be at the PUD level? Or can you define? I think my challenge would be that currently staff can do up to a 20% variance on any of the setbacks right now, correct? In a type 2 variance.
That is correct.
And so that was the council's concern, was that a 20% variance at a staff level decision is a subjective decision and not discretionary, where they can say no. Councilor Scott, you want to chime in too?
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask, it says remove exceptions to setbacks. Do we have currently exceptions to setbacks in our code? And what are they?
20%.
So you can
I thought that was a variance.
So
Are we talking about a variance, or are we talking about an exception? Because those are two different things.
10% and 20%. There's two levels.
So maybe I need to understand definitionally what is an exception and what is a variance.
And isn't it actually called an adjustment?
Adjustment.
Yeah.
Yes, so just recapping, city council, the words that were utilized were exceptions.
No. I want to know what the current code says. What is a current exception and what is a current variance or adjustment?
Okay, so we're saying that the word is not an exception, it's called an adjustment. And we are saying for an adjustment, front yard setback can be adjusted up to 10%. In addition to interior setback up to 10%, is pretty much 10%. In regards to the variances, for a Class B variance, which is administrative, is up to 20%. Anything above that would be a Class A and would be in front of the Planning Commission.
So what does someone have to do to get the 10%? I come in, I want a 10% adjustment. What do I have to do?
They definitely have criteria that let's see. There is approval criteria. It states that adjustment is required due to lot configuration or other conditions on the site. The adjustment does not result in removal of trees or is proposed in order to preserve trees. If trees are present in the development area, the adjustment will not result in violations of any other adopted ordinance or code standards, and each code standard to be modified shall require a separate adjustment. An application for an adjustment is limited to one lot or parcel per application, and no more than 3 adjustments may be approved for one lot or parcel in 12 months.
Okay. So there's no such code language then that, about exceptions or variances. There's only adjustments. Is that?
No, that's just the adjustments. And then the variance, the criteria, it's very similar. The variance request is required due to lot configurations and other conditions on site. It doesn't result in removal of trees or in order to preserve trees. It's not going to result in violation of any ordinance or code standards. It's limited, as far as the Class B variance is limited to 3 or fewer lots per application. It has to have a very minimal impact to the adjacent properties. And the variance is minimum need to achieve the desired result, and the applicant has considered alternatives.
Okay, so an adjustment is up to 10% and can be made, I guess, by staff, and a variance is up to 20% and can also be made by staff?
Yes.
Okay, so that seems a little clunky to me. It feels like I don't see the difference between those two. If they're both staff decisions, you know, and it didn't seem to be a lot of difference between what allows the 10% versus what allows the 20%. So other than, I guess, how many things you can put on an application, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So am I correct in saying there is no such thing as an exception then?
Correct.
Okay, so that's just the remove exceptions is just
it's adjustments.
We're removing something that doesn't exist. Okay. Okay.
It's adjustments or variances, and the difference between the two is that on a variance for 20%, notice goes out to the public.
Okay, so 10% it doesn't, 20% notices. Okay, that's fine. So for, you know, just from my point of view, I think just for your guys' interest in our meeting, I think there was pretty strong consensus that the council does not want to see setbacks reduced in any zone type. I think there was concern from the mayor primarily around, you know, making it maybe it's too easy or not wanting it to be too easy for reductions to occur in the future. We didn't take a vote, so I don't know how strongly that 5% versus 10% versus 20%. We didn't really discuss it at that level of detail among council, so I can't say, you know, honestly can't say who supports 5% versus who's fine with 20%. I think we're looking for more guidance from you all on that.
Is anybody else?
I think the mayor. Let me just finish one more thing. I think the mayor's point of view is he's concerned about any possibility for any variance or exception. He wants very, very clear, hard rules that are really, really difficult to be adjusted by staff or by a particularly crafty applicant. I don't know that that's what the whole council wants, or that that's even realistic or sustainable, but that's just one point of view.
Is that a problem or a threat that we anticipate?
Well, we have quite a few developers, and I think you hit the nail on the head when they're going around unusually configured lots, and there's a reason to have an adjustment, but those come in on larger site plans, like the one we saw up in Southeast Sherwood, where they were trying to get the lots as small as possible, and then they had to adjust the side lot variances or the rear setback variances so that they could make that house fit on that lot and they could get as many in as possible. So
I worry that I support also allowing maybe less approvals at the staff level and have some kind of bounce up. I would worry about not being able to approve those exceptions and making it more difficult. So my only concern is I don't know how much that slows down the process, right? If we take the approval process from that level and they have to come at a, I don't know how far out we schedule our agendas, but all of a sudden, if we are a place that is difficult to move things along because we're having to, personally approve too many things, I worry that that would also slow down or discourage people from working with us. Right. But I also agree. I don't want people trying to get around the standards, right? This boils down to make it look nice. Don't be a jerk. So if we can, is there an ability to reduce some of the, maybe the number of variances, but not totally remove that from the staff? Or is this something that's happening on every, build, or is it, once a month, or, I have no idea of the amount of effort this is.
So from staff's point of view, we typically get variances and setbacks that are tied to plan unit developments that you guys have definitely seen just because of the difficult sites and also for them to utilize the site as fully as they can. We typically don't get lots of land use applications that are asking for adjustments or variances. And again, the variance aspect of it does have a criteria that talks about it has to identify the minimal impact to the adjacent properties, but also it needs to consider the result. The applicant has considered alternatives. So it's still difficult for them to get a Class B variance because if staff can find a different alternative for them to do something different so that they don't have the variance, we would be able to deny it. It is up to the applicant to provide a narrative justifying how they've looked at all of the alternatives and that how they can't utilize all those alternatives, and that's why the variance should be approved.
Commissioner Brown?
So I was just going to say, I don't want to say the parcel, but I've represented a couple developers in developments for exploring some parcels in Sherwood. And I've sat in on one of the staff requirement planning meetings where they were trying to decide if they were going to move forward. And there's a lot of parts of the code that actually protect. So it's not just the setbacks. There's so many other sections just to keep Sherwood. So to go through and, there's like the adjustments and variance. When people look at the development side and you're looking at the real estate side, there's so many, I don't want to say like hoops, but there's a lot of protection. So you're not having to deal with this so much. They've done a good job protecting the code.
So would it be inappropriate to think that removing the side yard variances and reducing the front yard setbacks to 5 and 10% instead of 10 and 20% is a consideration the commission would entertain, or not?
I would entertain that. I would vote yes.
Other commissioners want to think about it as we go through this process?
Yeah, I guess, my thoughts are, what problem are we fixing? And for me, the problem still isn't clear. We have some people who don't like it, but I still don't see where the problem is.
Okay.
I think it's more of a trying to head off a future problem before it happens kind of bucket. I like Gene's proposal. I think it's a good middle ground.
And it may not be with the existing Sherwood, but as density starts moving in the Sherwood West area, I think more and more exceptions are going to be, or variances and adjustments are going to be needed to get fourplexes on a location where a single family house will be. And if we start reducing our setbacks and increasing our density, we may lose the, I guess, the luxury we have of having a little bit of space in between each house and having the ability to have trees and just a neighborhood that's not so densely packed that we can't breathe. So
I think that's one of the very essence of Keep Sherwood Sherwood.
Well, and I think what's good about keeping Sherwood Sherwood is, even though we're talking about the setbacks and stuff, there's so many other elements to moving a development forward. So if they're trying to adjust the setbacks and get into that adjustment, they're going to have to adjust other things. And so it probably 99% of the time is going to land in front of the Planning Commission.
Mm-hmm. So it's okay. So before we belabor it, does anybody have any other thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Okay. Garages and off-street parking, consider a required element as far as the functionality of the proposed garage. Need standards for single and double car garages, like how wide or the minimum door height, but it must be functional, like no furnaces or stairs. I do want to let you know, I did talk to the building official, and he did say that the building code itself has minimum sizes for habitable rooms, but does not have any specific requirements for garages, other than that the floor shall be non-combustible material and shall be sloped towards the opening, the door opening. Mechanical equipment is a vehicle in a vehicle path needs to be protected with a bollard. And most houses have furnace and water heaters in their garages. And if the house is built on a slope, it will most likely have stairs for the from the garage up to the floor level. And the construction industry has basic standards for size, width, depth, and height of garages. But they're not standards that are enforceable by the building code. But let me show you design elements that I retrieved online that shows a one-car garage. Typically, the width is 12 feet. A depth can be from 20 to 24, and the typical width of the door is 8 feet. For two-car garages, an average range from 18 to 20 feet, depth 20 to 24, and again, door width for 16. And I did put up three-car garages, which are usually there's a double width door and a single car door to accommodate all three. So 26 to 28 width, depth of 20 to 24, which is still consistent with all the others, single door width of 8 and a double door width of 16.
Councilor Scott, you want to give the council input?
Yeah. So the reason this came up was there is either some definite or likely legislation coming down the pipe from above outside the city that will require us to start, like as of right now, when you count parking in developments, you're not allowed to count the garage as a parking spot. So if a developer, our code says you have to provide one off-street parking spot. So, but the developer can't use the garage to count that. So they have to provide enough driveway space to account for that off-street parking. There's potential legislation, and Erica or Julia can correct me here, but my understanding is there's legislation coming or likely coming or potentially coming that will allow garages to begin being counted as off-street parking. And then therefore, then what could happen, what could then reasonably follow from that is that, well, we've met the requirement through a garage, therefore we don't have to provide enough driveway space to meet that need because we've provided it to the garage. And the concern that some members of council had is that a lot of garages are potentially being built are potentially not big enough to actually house the car. So the developer meets the criteria with the garage. They don't provide enough driveway to park in, yet the car doesn't actually fit in the garage, and therefore everyone's parking on the street. And so what we're going after here is, can we do something in the code to ensure that there's an envelope of space within the garage that, of a minimum size, width, height, depth, that would ensure that, at least a reasonably sized car would fit in there, right? It doesn't have to hold a Hummer necessarily, but, a standard, a standard midsize or, SUV or minivan or something would fit in that envelope, and that it can't have a bollard in it or a stairway in it or some other equipment in it that's encroaching upon that envelope. So that's what this was about.
Thank you for the clarity. Commissioner Giles?
So is this also where we would talk about possible requirements to have, a 220 outlet in the garage for electric car charging, or fiber internet pulled to the house, or any of that kind of infrastructures? Or is it just the looks of the physical building?
I don't know, Joy, are we in a single family residence going to be able to require that type of? She's shaking her head no.
I don't believe so. Even though that is one of the comments that we did receive at the open house, is, considering all of the new electric vehicles to have this type of outlet, but it's not within our, it would be definitely within the building code versus the planning realm. And at the same time, even if we do build these structures bigger or wider, we don't regulate what the property owner is going to do in that space. And typically it ends up being a storage.
Okay.
From my own personal experience.
Council understands we can't require people to park in the garage. I think it was more like, we want to make sure that the garage space is enough that someone could park there, should they choose to, versus, oh, I've moved into this new house and the garage doesn't fit my car. Then it's not even an option, right?
So based on what Joy shared earlier, we can incorporate something like that into the code to say the minimum, with minimum setbacks, with no intrusions of ballard stairs or other equipment.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'd be fine with that.
Yes. I see a couple other hands raised. Commissioner Bance, you're next.
Yeah, is that state of Oregon that's you're referring to from on high that you're talking about? Are they working on that bill? Okay. Must be next year thing. I'm just, because you're right, that could, well, I'm just thinking, would it do away with driveways potentially? I mean, if we have a setback requirement and then a garage requirement, what are they going to do with the space in between? I mean, you have to have some ability to get your car to the garage, right? Maybe that's what setbacks can help be used for.
That's
It'll kind of implicitly result in a driveway.
Yes, that's the hope.
And I think that's true. But also there are certain types of middle housing types that, the setbacks might be, or in a higher density situation, the setback is lower. But a garage is required. Also, I think it's just a matter of, let's put up as many protections in place as we can, because one may get knocked down later, and then at least we have the second one, right? So if we get told later, you can't require a 20-foot setback now, you have to allow 10, then at least we have the garage requirement. Or if somebody comes back later and says you can't mandate garage sizes, at least we have the setback that allows for a driveway, right? So we're covering bases, future proofing a little bit.
And parking being one of the biggest complaints that we hear at the open house, that was the most commented on item singularly, was the parking. That's was not
surprising. Yeah.
So on this slide and all the examples that Joy has, should we add height to this as well?
Yes,
I think we need a minimum height.
You do? Or don't?
I do think we need a minimum height. Yeah, I think there's been, I don't know that we've seen these in Sherwood, but at the city council meeting, it came up that there's been some some fairly low height garages built in certain places of late that may not accommodate certain vehicles. I don't know what the right height is, or the width or length for that matter, but I think there should be a minimum height.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Two
Okay.
down. Couple more to go.
All right. So then the next item that was identified has to do with public street. If the design standards are applied to elevations that are seen from a public street, the question was, what is considered a street? And of course, we have a definition of a street, which is a public or private road, easement, or right-of-way that is created to provide access to one or more lots, parcel areas, or tracts of land. That does include alleys, because there was a question, well, is an alley considered a street? Which is, under the definition, it is a street because it says it's a narrow street, typically abutting to a rear lot or property line. So again, just by the definition of the code, it is, an alley is considered a street, but the question to you is, should residential design standards apply to alley elevations or rear elevations when seen from the street? Like the image on the bottom, which is a double frontage lot, and you can see the rear of the homes. And then on corner lots, should we be considering them as having two street frontages, like the image to the top, or the top image, where definitely on the corner lot, you see the front elevation and the side elevation?
Councilor Scott.
So it's funny, I was actually thinking about maybe a definition update here, is that instead of saying elevation seen from a public street, but maybe we don't need to modify this now that I read this nice synopsis that Joy provided. But the way I was thinking about it was elevations, facing a public right of way, which could be a street, an alley, a sidewalk, or whatever. But putting that definitional aspect aside, I think the council and myself would strongly agree with the idea that they absolutely should apply to both elevations of a corner lot. Personally, we haven't talked about this at council, but personally, I don't think they should apply to the rear elevation like in the picture below. I think that's a little onerous in my opinion.
So the standard that we have currently drafted, it says detailed design, 5 detailed design elements are required on street facing elevations.
So the corner lot.
Too narrow a definition. I think it needs to be elevations facing a public right of way. Because to your point, an alley is technically considered a street, but there also could be a scenario where you have a sidewalk, but not necessarily a street, or a walking boulevard or something, I mean, we have a couple of things like that around in Sherwood, like thinking about a nature path, for example, cutting through the wetlands, and you have houses on both sides of it. I feel like that elevation should be treated the same as a front elevation, since it faces a public right of way.
Okay.
Maybe I'm alone.
Well, I was just thinking the person that owns the house, you're buying on the walkway, and so you're going to have people walking past your kitchen window, or whatever window it happens to be. Could be challenging, but I see your point. It's facing the public, so don't have an answer. And then from the commission, what is your input on the lower picture? If those, instead of having windows and other things, they were just blank walls, how would you feel about that as the street-facing facade that people would see driving by?
As an owner of a house that has the ugliest side of my house facing a major road in our city, I wish that it applied even to the back of the house.
I agree.
I mean, it's tough because I know that, my house was actually probably designed for another lot, and they put it on this. It doesn't fit the lot at all, and so I would say, if you're going to do strange lots, we need to have you alter your designs or something so that you can make it work. If you've got two sides, or because even that one at the top, with the whole long side of it, that feels a little bit stark for me. But then
yeah, and it doesn't meet the minimum requirements. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any comments about either the corner lot coverage and or the rear of the house facing the public street?
No, I'm good with the back of the house. I don't know that I, to be honest, totally followed the other discussion, what we were talking about there with is it like public view wherever you're seeing the house, like the top one there?
Yeah, so instead of this being a street on the top view, which I'm pointing out, which makes no sense, but if that were a nature path to a park setting, would we also want the same treatment because the public is walking down the street there instead of, a boulevard treatment for a bike or pedestrian path? Should that be treated the same as a street?
So that top photo too, I just want to let you know to provide some additional context. There is a sidewalk that goes that.
Right, but it looks like there's a street next to it because there's a park there, car park there.
There is a street.
Yes, yeah. If instead of having a street there, that was a multi-use path only, to Councilor Scott's comment that instead of using the term public street, we use public right-of-way, then a multi-use path would be treated the same as a public street.
I support that if it matters.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
All
Would
opinions. All
public right-of-way?
Yes.
Would public right-of-way also be defined as wherever the power lines are? So if you've got power lines that are stringing through behind someone's house, that's now, I don't know if that's an easement or public right-of-way, but would that affect things? I've got BPA wires that run back here. I don't know if it's public right-of-way that they're on, or if it's their own. I doubt it's their own private property, but that means the back of my house would have to conform.
So usually those are access easement, pedestrian and bicycle access easements, because usually those are owned by the BPA or PGE aspect of it, and that the public has a right to access it, but it is not considered public right-of-way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Scott?
I was just going to say, I would propose we let staff know the gist of what we want, and then they can figure out definitionally how to write it up.
Yep, and we can move on to the next one.
Okay, and so I did hear requirement for elevations, including the rear, right? Correct? And definitely on corner lots,
Yeah.
both sides of the corners would be. Okay, I just want to confirm those two. All right, let's move on.
Well, Han, is it as extensive as what would we require on the front? Like, is it the 15% glazing and all that? I mean, because there is an element I heard earlier about privacy. People in their homes, you know, if you just got windows everywhere, you're gonna have your blinds drawn all the time. I mean, sometimes maybe you do want more of a blank wall just to have a room that nobody can look into. Of course, on the other hand, in the top picture, where are you going to put a window that somebody can't look into? It's,
Right.
things are crammed together. So I don't know, maybe less of a requirement for some of those, just to give, I don't know.
Well, I was going to save this till the end so when we could talking about it. So I'll throw this out because it was one of those ideas that I came up when we were talking with some of the people at the open house. is that 15% glazing, how do you measure it? Is it only the glass, or are you going to measure the frame also? And what about the door? How far outdoor? And the answer from staff was, my interpretation is this. And the person from the open house says, well, that's your interpretation. What about the next staff person? And I thought, that's an interesting concept. Are we really looking for glazing? Because the other comment was energy efficiency. Is it about putting glass out there, or is it about putting architectural design and features that cover 25% of the building? Because the picture at the beginning of Joy's presentation, which I didn't know anything about before she had the presentation, had belly bands and other things that, 4 palette paint, belly bands, if it had a bottom, top, and a belly band, and they had awnings and shutters, and the glazing was only 10%, but the architectural design and the pop-outs that they do covered 40%, that would be a better result. So I wanted to throw that out to say, are we being too prescriptive by saying it has to be 15% glazing versus 25% architectural design elements? So when we get to that discussion,
we don't have the discussion now.
we
Okay.
we can, but I don't want to miss if rest of Joy's presentation, because that was my point, is that there might be ways that we can allow the developers to be more creative, have more options, but I don't know the right way to do it or the perfect way to do it. So go ahead, you can comment if you.
Okay.
Did someone have a comment on my wild idea?
I'm all for it.
So I know this development well because it's one of my family's developments. So do we know what the difference in cost would be if we're having kind of developers? Because I think it's important to have the privacy, so you're not, a lot of people aren't wanting to purchase the corner lot because of the lack of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the privacy and then the cost of materials, would that go into then kind of go into the permit part when they're pulling plans? And if that's a corner lot, then they have to have something else that they add to the cost to have specialty windows and extras versus the one next door, if there's a public right of way?
The corner
Yes.
lot. The corner lot would be more costly because it would have an extra design and element. It also has usually a bigger yard, but
Yeah.
But my thought when saying it this way was, instead of having 15% glazing and being prescriptive on just that one single element, allowing the architect to have design elements that may not be as costly or non-energy efficient or privacy reducing, by instead of having windows, you have shutters that take up the space, or you have awnings that take up the space, or you have an architectural design element that takes up the blank wall space so that it would meet a design criteria. It doesn't have to cost more, it just has to be more creative.
I like that, with the awnings and things. That would be really nice for people.
I favor leaving it open for creativity and differentiation, as long as it is, again, intentional design versus, you're right, it doesn't have to be windows. It could be other things that are interesting.
I'm just thinking, and that example above, just how much difference a belly band would make on that one corner house, and you're talking, a couple $100 of lumber.
Yes.
Right.
And for paint colors, that doesn't, I think the cost of the paint doesn't cost that much. It's just the application of it that would be a little bit more. So again, a few dollars more and a little bit of paint, you might have a completely different look. So They can be
$200
creative.
lumber a year ago, $1 million now.
I was trying to adjust for inflation.
Oh,
And one comment that was at the open house was that we really need to, if we're going to have natural wood garage doors, we also need to allow for rhinestones and embedded jewel stones in our doors because of the I'm assuming based on the cost of the lumber, you know, diamonds, rubies, and emeralds would be just as cost efficient. So,
Well, wouldn't that
Sounds
be
good.
an architectural feature?
yes, there you go.
diamonds. I like the concept.
Okay, so that was my concept. That's why I was hoping to go through what the council had said, hit the points that aren't part of the actual 5 design standards and 8 points or whatever. So,
All right. So let's move on, and then we can definitely have more discussion about those elements after this here. Let's see.
okay.
Other requests by city council, on-site swales, right-of-way width to allow for parking on both sides of the street, and amending the code to allow for self-appeal to city council. All these requests are currently being discussed internally and with some agency partners, basically with other avenues, and are not within the purview of the Planning Commission, but I wanted to bring them up so that you know that these are other things for staff to consider.
Thank you. So
we actually held an in-person open house, which is pretty awesome. It happened on a Thursday evening and a Saturday morning in the community room. We had about 10 to 11 members come every those days each, so about over 20, which I thought was a successful event just because it was the first in-person open house. Overall comments were the residential design elements were being too prescriptive and allowing for more allowance within design options. And as Jean mentioned, parking was also identified several times as a community need.
And did someone say earlier that the first comment was from industry?
We had someone from the industry that was in attendance, and I think Jean and he were definitely exchanging thoughts.
We were very engaged. He was very creative, and he helped me try to figure out, try to punch holes in what we were trying to do to make something that was going to be successful both for the city and from a developer standpoint. So I appreciated his attendance and you know, putting us to the test, dare I say.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I personally received like 2 different comments saying, what if someone was innovative and wants different type of design elements, you know, you're not allowing for that. I didn't have our process chart, and I did say, yes, we do actually have an avenue for that, but it would be a type 4 in front of the Planning Commission. So it's not as if we're totally eliminating it, but it is definitely a different process.
We also, and I know it was in Joy's handout in the packet that we got, the 6 pictures that she had presented, and to a person, everybody liked the ones that passed our design standard examples, and there was the only concern that I heard about people who liked some of the houses that didn't pass was they didn't understand why the front door was an issue, the location. That was, you know, they liked the house, but didn't know why the front door was, you know, not counting as being close enough. So.
Right. All right. So follow up to legal questions you guys had. We didn't forget about it. So one of the questions, are there different litigations on, or are there current litigations on the House Bill 2001? And currently there are no land use or court appeals for that legislation. Then the second question was, what happens if we adopt language and the law changes? Just like any other standard, if it's no longer valid due to litigation or legislative changes, city would have to make changes to the code to be consistent with the law. Just like changes to marijuana regulations, changes to accessory dwelling units, that aspect of it. The last question that I'm sure you guys would have asked is if, as far as land use vesting or goalposts allowed. Josh sent me an email late this afternoon and basically said that he has to look into that. So there isn't a direction there yet. And lastly, tonight, I wanted to talk to you guys about the accessory dwelling unit update. It was part of your packet. It was a simple tweaks to that particular section of the accessory dwelling unit chapter. We had to remove owner occupancy, maximum number of residents, and parking standard requirements.
And is this part of the design standards that we're adopting this year, or is that part of the House Bill 2001 that we're going to take to hearing next year?
Staff was planning on just rolling with adding them to the design standards, unless directed otherwise.
Okay, just asking. Except that you're changing the parking standard. And that doesn't take into effect until 2022. And for 6 months, I don't want to add any more parking problems if we don't have to.
So I just want to take a step back here. The accessory dwelling unit legislation passed in 2019 and was updated with House Bill 2001. But these standards right here already apply per state law. So our code is already out of date and should be updated as soon as possible. So these don't necessarily reflect the like middle housing standards that we have to meet for the June date.
Okay, so it's not directly related to House Bill 2001. It's code cleanup from previous legislation.
Correct.
Okay, so that would be in the little commentary, that would be better to define, to differentiate between the two, because it says in here, off-street parking requirements reflect House Bill 2002 clarifications. And so my thought was we would just wait for 2000 or 2001. So if it is because we're already out of state law requirement, then we probably should update the commentary.
We'll update that.
Yes, we'll definitely fix the footnote. All right. Okay, I think I might be close to my last slide here, maybe. So this is the opportunity to discuss any changes or comments to the residential design standards. As Jean suggested, we can definitely touch base on the design elements last. And we can definitely touch base on, starting from the definitions and moving forward.
So I was hoping if we go to that really big packet that we have, there's, it starts on page 17, there's commentary about new definitions. And that section that has to do with definition goes on for several pages. And I had turned into staff some comments that it wasn't all alphabetical and there was some clarity that needed to be done on the dwelling type. So I think a cleaner version will be coming out. Did anybody else have any other definition concerns on this part of the document, starting like page 17 through 22, something like that? Yes. I don't see anybody raising hands, so we're just going to flip right through to the next section. The next one is 16.12, land use districts. The only changes that were in here were in orange, mainly, that we'll be hitting on the next one. I want to note for the commission, in case I win the lottery and forget to come to the next meeting, or, you know, whatever. I have asked if item 3 on page 25, which is the Southeast Sherwood Master Plan, it's already a planned unit development. Why would we need to add additional density requirements under House Bill 2001 when we're already adding density because it's a PUD? And shouldn't it be under the goalposts that were set when we set the PUD? So in that 16.12, it goes through page 27, and then we get into page 28, 29. These are when we start talking about setbacks. And again, a lot of stuff is in orange, but I didn't know if anybody had any comments about any of the setbacks addition to what we've already discussed.
Well, wasn't one of the first things that came up the meeting today had to do with setbacks from council? Curious about those percentages, I think, or I can't remember what it was at the very beginning.
Yeah, it's how much we would allow in the variance and the adjustment category. So if we go to page 30, there's setbacks in the front yard, the garage, the side yard, and then there's a separate process that adjustments and variances are allowed. And I think from the previous discussion, staff is going to revisit that part of the code, which I don't know which section that's in.
I mean, is there, to kind of accommodate some of that, I mean, VLDR is by definition very low density. Maybe we require further setback just to have more space on the property. I don't know. Would that accommodate some of what's a concern? I mean, it's the same number, you know, all the way through low density.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe with VLDR, we up that a bit.
Up it to 30.
Sure.
And then the face of the garage would be 35. Anybody else have any comment on that, or staff want to review see if that is a workable number within the VLDR standards that still meets the criteria?
Yes, we can definitely look at that.
Okay. Perfect.
And within that same section too, this is where the table itself identified the minimum landscape required percentage of total lot area. And I know that we, from our discussion earlier this evening, we're going to be reevaluating that.
Mm-hmm. So, and we've kind of landed on focusing on the front yard.
Right.
Right.
Okay, and a percentage there.
Yes, and with a caveat to irregular lot shaped lots. And corner
I think
lots.
we should also note, yeah, I was going to say that corner lots should have that applied to both the front and the side yard facing the street.
I do have corner lots identified, but with a question mark on the percentage.
Yep, and I would think we need to kind of look at it, just because at some point the side yard gets to be fenced in. So if it's behind the fence, then it would be hard to enforce something behind the fence.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you just take it as in totality, right? Like a certain percentage of the entire front/side yard outside, the fence, the allowed fence area has to be landscaped.
There you
go. Okay.
Okay, so the next section is the building design. So I was hoping to see if I could skip that just so that we can come back and deal with that all at once after we see if there's anybody having any concerns with some of the other less contentious, less complicated ones.
I did have a question on 16.14.040, which I think I have the packet page number. Let me go get the page.
Which is the packet page number.
Well, I've got it's page number 53, packet page 157.
Yep.
I guess
Cottage.
Yes,
oh,
cottage.
Yeah.
Cottage clusters.
Now this is House Bill, but So B1, cottage clusters must include at least 4 dwellings and may not contain more than 8 to 12 dwellings. Why is it a range that's a maximum? Why not just put 12 or decide on 8?
We, as far as staff and planning commission, have not identified exactly what that number is. It is highlighted in yellow, so there still needs to be further discussion.
Okay. So it's highlighted because we need to decide what the number is and talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that also came up on one of the other. Your memo had some questions about 16 to 24, and and we
7AI. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think I answered that by reading more thoroughly. It says it's referring to cottage cluster developments, which is different than just cottage clusters. So apparently you can have cottage clusters of 8 to 12 units, and then you can have whole developments of multiple cottage clusters, and that's how you get to the 16 and 24. I saw that.
Clusters.
Yes.
It's clusters of clusters. Yeah, sure. But I did. That was my follow-up question, though. Is there a limit to the number of clusters in the big cluster? And when I went back to definitions, I didn't see one. It just says cottage cluster development is more. I think it's like 1 or more clusters. And I didn't know if we could even code a limit to that. I don't know. It might be implied that there is a limit, since we're saying 16 to 24 suggests there could be 2 or 3, but I don't know if that's something we could do.
I think we'll have staff bring that back to let us know whether there's a maximum allowed, and if the state HB 2001 has it restricting us from doing anything, and then we can discuss it when we come to hearing, or when we come back.
Yeah.
When we do the work session before the 2022 hearing. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We will definitely.
House Bill 2001. It just caught my eye. So.
Yeah.
And we'll be coming back to all these standards at the beginning of next year.
Mm-hmm.
So I've the whole 16.14 I'm gonna paperclip and come back to. The next section is 1622. It's a simple, it's changing it from multifamily to multi-dwelling, and I had seen comments back and forth about the why we were doing this, the reason for doing it, are we required of doing that? And it's maybe not definitive answer tonight. I think in reading something, and I can't remember if it was Commissioner Bant's comments or someplace else I read, that multifamily is a term that is very common in the industry, and that we're making it awkward by being multi-dwelling housing. That is not a commonly used term, or if it is going to be a commonly used term, are we making the cutting edge? So looking towards staff to say, is this a requirement or just a preference?
And some more color there. I just want to use English that's not confusing. I realize it may not be specific to today, that it's not always families per se. I get that. But are we losing common English speech by being more precise? Like if I end up having to, when somebody says, well, what does that mean? Oh, it just means multifamily. Well, then we should just use multifamily. And like I said, I work for a regulated bank. FDIC regulates this. I just looked at all their laws and regulations today, and it's very prescribed. It's a well-defined term. Non-resident or non-farm 5+. I couldn't find multi-dwelling anywhere in the code. I mean, these are common. This is common nomenclature, and so it's just a name. It's nomenclature. It just kind of occurred to me that are we going to be introducing some new term that we're going to have to keep defining? Are we trying to set a bar by just being more precise, or should we just use commonly used terminology? That's kind of what hit me with that. It's because it seems we're going to great lengths to replace that throughout all of our code.
I support common language, and we're not defining what a family is. We're just saying multifamily, right? If it would be considered, I don't know if that's you file 2 tax returns or whatever. I don't care. It's the.
Well, what if it's just roommates?
That's still multifamily, right?
Well, they're not family though.
Right.
Well, they're 2 individuals that would identify themselves as separate families, and so they are multifamily. And again, I'm fine either way. If we're inventing a term that is not in common usage, it seems like we're asking for confusion or ambiguity, right? To me, I've never heard either term, so I'm not biased to one over the other.
So, Erica, in your world, your profession, what are you seeing? Is this the common term that the planners and developers are starting to use now? And
yes, I think in the planning world and development world, people are moving towards using multi-dwelling instead of multifamily. But we can definitely come back to Planning Commission and give you some additional guidance.
Commissioner Brown had to say.
I was under the impression at our city council meeting, you told us that this would be required by law to change. Is that not accurate?
We can't. The definition of family and taking that out of the code.
Yeah, we can't define family. I think we all understand that, and we all agree with that. But we don't have to remove the word family from the code. We can use the term multifamily and define multifamily as any collection of people that live in one dwelling unit.
That's perfect, and to me that's
makes more sense.
It's definitive, and we are defining multifamily and using multifamily as a common term.
You don't even have to use the definition of people in that definition. You could just say 5 or more units.
Well, but I'm talking about, but you could have a single family dwelling also, and you could have, a duplex, right? So that's not 5 or more units, right?
Right.
What you're saying in this particular instance of the word family, you're talking about multifamily dwelling, which refers to 5 or more units.
Right.
But in other parts of the code, you've suggested also removing the word family in favor of dwelling. And honestly, reading through it, it's very clunky. So I prefer just leaving the word family in and then changing the definitional parts.
before we stop trying to define family.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Aaron, I
you might be
suggest we'll
referring-
talk to Josh and get his, just make sure that if there's a reason why we need to do it, we get his input, and if there's not, then do exactly as they're suggesting.
Perfect, thank you.
And because I think you might also refer to other parts of code. It's also the same for single-family residential, which we're relabeling single detached dwelling, something very.
Right.
Yep.
It's not familiar, you know, and yeah, right.
And a simple clause that says family as defined in this code is a group of people residing in a single unit is beautiful. I love how you said that, Counselor Scott.
I mean, if society in English moves along and that becomes the common nomenclature we deal, I just don't know if we want to be on the edge of trying to confuse things, is my point. Yeah.
All right. So 1640, it's talking about cottage cluster developments. We're starting on page 60 and 61, which is the old packet 164, 165. And this is all orange. And then more about changing dwelling types. And I'm just going to flip through because the next section is 1644 townhomes. Pretty much most of this whole section is being removed and incorporated into the 1614 section. It's all being folded in. So we're deleting that, most of that section. 1650 is more about cottage clusters. 1652 is now on page 70, accessory dwelling units. And we had, that's going to, the staff's going to come back with us to see if we,
In your packet,
yeah,
your packet has the updated version. And there was a comment that was made, and I didn't see it in the packet, about the maximum percentage of yard coverage as an that had come up previously. If we're gonna address accessory dwelling units, there had been a comment about there's setbacks and dimensional requirements, but no maximum lot coverage.
So the lot coverage question and how it could be addressed. Either you're going to address lot coverage through a minimum landscape requirement, or you're going to address the entire lot and state a percentage for impervious, coverage. I think it'll be really hard to have a minimum landscaping requirement, and then on top of that, a lot coverage requirement.
I'm talking about accessory dwelling units added to existing homes when they create an additional building on an existing lot that was built under old standards. And we could take it offline. Counselor Scott, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm kind of the mind that if they meet all of the setback requirements, isn't that good enough?
Okay.
Right? So they have like the setback requirements kind of give you a building envelope, right? You have to have 20 feet front and rear, 5 feet, 5 feet otherwise. And if you can build an ADU that meets all of those setback requirements, how is it any different than if the original house was just built bigger?
Perfect. That brings clarity. And if we are looking at adjustments and variances and not using the ADUs to encroach inside those setbacks, that would bring comfort to me to make sure that we're not overbuilding a neighborhood.
And then remember, the ADU also has the maximum size as well as 800 square feet. So that's another limitation.
Okay, perfect. Moving on, we're on page 72, which is 1660 yard requirements. This is, I have no idea. Oh, except for townhomes. If someone has any comments, I am just going to keep flipping 1664, 1668.
I have one on page, what was it? 83. Minor, very minor.
Oh, good. That's my next comment, which is 1672. It's page 83, and it's on the previous packet of 187. It's 1672 processing development permits. Go ahead.
Yeah, second paragraph, the orange part, and middle housing types. I was thinking that the word housing should be blue, in the sense that that's what goes into code now, because otherwise the sentence lacks a subject. If you just remove all the orange, review proposals for single detached something requiring a clear and objective review, I think what we mean is housing. So and middle and types can go away in the, for now in the orange. I don't know how I noticed that one. That was my nitpick day.
Well, that's great, because I nitpicked the whole statement and said it's for all residential types except multifamily. So I agreed. Perfect. So
Yep,
yay.
it's been noted.
Thank you. All right, next is 85. This is the process part where, nope, the council can call up. That was just, we can't talk about, well, not that we can't, but it's out of our purview. 1676 is, community development director can do it instead of the planning director. 1684, this is the variance. So we're on page 91, which is old packet 195. This is the types of variances and adjustments. And I think staff has heard that we want to reduce or change 10 to 5 and 20 to 10, or both of them to 5%, or, a compromise, or council's direction is no variances and adjustments on that section. So, and then I've got several pages.
I just want to
Councilor
say,
Scott.
I don't know that it's fair to say council's direction was that. That was heard at the meeting. I don't know that it represents the plurality of council. So that's one point of view.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, but council, just as I remember, council is going to review this again on September 7th before we get to hearing. So they'll have an opportunity to hear our conversation and then potentially make their own direction if they have a consensus vote. So it'll come back to us with clear direction, I hope. Commissioner Widola?
Yeah, I guess my comment on the side setback, removal of the variances, we're talking, 3 to 6 inches or 6 to 12 inches is what we're referring to. So we're talking about very small movements here of setbacks, whether a gutter extends or who knows what it can be. And I don't know. I think it's good the way it is. I don't think we, moving away, I've made my point earlier, but, I just want to make sure we're clear that we're talking, going from 3 inches to 6 inches or 6 inches to 12 inches.
So a 5-foot setback, 5
feet, 60 inches, if my math is correct. So 6 is 10%.
Yep. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Good call. Thank you. And I think don't we have to keep 3 feet for building code, fire code? So good point. Thank you. All right. I don't have any flags or comments for several pages. I don't know if anybody else has any comments. And Joy, I hope you're tracking with the matrix that we're answering and asking all those questions that are in the matrix.
It's like,
Because the next one I hit was page 101, site planning. Oh, that was just a question for staff, sorry. When you actually go back and read the whole code, you went, oh, that was what was going on, huh? So page 109, packet 213, there's a parking and loading plan.
Yeah.
And staff may have to help me remember, because I had a couple of questions, because some of what we had discussed was street widths, making sure that there's parking on both sides. And then this part of the code said that a parking plan is not required for any development of residential houses. And I wanted to kind of, first off, ask staff, are we allowed to ask for a parking plan if the development contains a certain number of units? And would the commission entertain that as an idea that we should ask a person developing 5 or 10 units that they have to have a parking plan? Is that of a concern that anybody would want to pursue further?
I mean, parking's an issue, so I think it's a valid question. In fact, one of the feedback from the open house was talking about bigger streets, have the double wide streets, people can park on both sides. I mean, there's clearly a parking need. So I think either we figure out a way to make sure there's ample street area, or there's parking, some sort of parking venue, if possible.
So within page 109, there's a parking and loading plan that says a parking and loading plan is not required for, and it's pretty much all the residential design types that we're showing. So I was going to propose that of developments less than 4 or less than 5, or some number that says if you're putting in a single quadplex or you're putting in a 2 or 3 houses, you don't need a parking plan. But if you exceed a threshold, it would be appropriate to ensure that there's a parking plan. So
Can I interject here, Dean?
yes, Councilor Scott, in your very tiny voice.
I definitely agree with that in principle. However, if we have no ability or authority to require parking beyond the 1 off-street per unit, what's the point? They can give us a plan that says, yep, we're giving you 1 off-street per unit and no more, and there's nothing we can do about it. So what's the point of the plan?
And that goes to the new middle housing on quads, where we can only require 1 parking space.
So, but
Well, it also goes to entirety, right? We are only allowed currently to require 1 off-street parking per unit, and we can't require a certain number of on-street parking anywhere. So we can ask for all the parking plans we want, but we don't have any teeth to push back on them if we don't like them.
So Councilor Scott, I remember this came up a couple meetings ago or something, and where I had this weird, ludicrous idea that we reserve some land near developments for parking lots, but that of course costs the city money to buy that and build that out, so forth. And I remember you saying there was some maybe wild options that the council was thinking of that could work their way in. So I hear what you're saying. I just wonder if there's ideas out there, or because I don't remember exactly what you had said about that, to be honest.
I think we were talking about like a parking district where, in order to park on the street in a certain area, you'd have to have, a permit for that area or something like that, so that in theory you wouldn't have cars from one neighborhood spilling into another neighborhood because there's not enough parking anywhere. But it doesn't give us any ability to actually require additional parking to be built.
So Joy, Eric, is that's true? We can't require parking if a person comes in with 50 houses. We can't ask them to make sure they have adequate parking.
We can definitely, my notes here identify based on our discussion, Chair Simpson, is that we can include it as a submittal requirement, a parking plan, so that at least we've identified that they've addressed it and that they're providing their one parking space as required for subdivisions and PUDs, plan unit developments.
But we don't have, what Councilor Scott's saying is we have no teeth to enforce
Additional parking other than their one parking
That's correct.
space.
So the only time that we really need to see a parking plan is commercial, industrial, because we can't. So, okay, so then it's a moot point.
Can we require wider streets so that you get parking on both sides at least? Is that a possibility?
That's through the TSP.
We're exploring that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was on one of the other discussion items that is going to be through the transportation system plan.
Yeah, and actually Josh and I and Bob are meeting tomorrow just to discuss some ideas. So more to come on that.
Excellent. That would be great.
Okay.
So in the rest of the off-street parking, there's a bunch in orange about triplex and quads that we can't discuss. So I'm, not that we can't, but, oh, Commissioner Widola, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, and maybe I need some enlightenment from fellow commissioners and staff, but I might have a bias in the way I look at parking between, you got some neighborhoods, low density residential that, everyone's got at least 2-car garage, if not 3-car garage, and plenty of room in the driveway. And then you got like Cedar Brook Way, I believe, that's the multifamily, multi-units there with high density. And that's obviously a real bad, is there other neighborhoods in Sherwood that are good examples? Because I just keep thinking if people would use their garage for their cars, the parking problem would solve itself instead of having to put that onus on the public to solve that problem. So I admit that's a bias I have. So I'm looking for opinions and thoughts from the commission and staff.
As one who parks both our vehicles in our garages, I hear you. Yep, our driveway is always clear. But yeah.
I don't know. I don't drive in the Woodhaven area a lot, but I hear that there's a lot of parking issues in that area because the streets are too narrow to park on both sides. And they're, I don't know, maybe
it's
someone
overblown to an extent, but there's certain areas in Woodhaven where it's worse than others. But I think I would agree with both of the commissioners that everyone here has at least 2 cars, if not 3-car garages, and two, if not 3 spots in their driveways. So it's a solvable problem if individuals want to solve it themselves.
on existing development. When we get to middle housing, we have no choices. Yeah.
And that'll be issues, yeah.
And, while I hear you on that, like, I wish people would figure out how to get their cars in their garage. Obviously they don't want to, and we're a city government that's self-governing of the people. So they want more parking space outside. So I think it behooves us to at least consider maybe how to do that.
I'll do a drive through Woodhaven and a few other neighborhoods just to get a feeling for what these neighbors are complaining about and suffering through.
Okay.
Good idea.
And I park my full-size truck in my garage, by the way, so at least I have that going for me.
Yeah.
So I still have 2 other vehicles in the driveway, so. I guess I'm going 1696 on-site circulation. I don't see anything. 16100 is permanent signs. We're just changing family to dwelling. 16104 is improvement procedures, which is orange. 106, which is additional language, single detached dwellings are exempt from requirements. Oh, that's orange too. Okay, moving on. 16-120. If anybody has anything, I don't think I have anything. I moved right to 16-142, page 131, which is the old packet 135, multi-family developments. Was talking about parks, trees, and open spaces, and just noting that only 5% of the net buildable area is open space. And one question I had on the recreation facilities is 50% of the required common open space suitable for active recreation use planted in grass or suitably improved. And we've been talking about common area buildings when we get to cottage clusters. Is there any feeling from the commission about common area buildings in the required open spaces in multifamily and or using some sort of creative measures for landscaping and the 5% net buildable area for open space?
Is this already, I mean, there's not much blue or orange here. It's already code.
This was already code. My thought was within the recreation facilities and the standards that 50% of the required open space in item 2 has to be grass or suitably improved. And I thought as we're moving into cottage clusters and we had heard from the community, we want people to age in place. Should we allow a common area building or a pool or some other creative use of that open space be allowed, or do we want to continue to have it be planted in grass or suitably improved as the standard for recreational facilities in multi-family developments? And there's no need to change it. Code's been working, so just was.
So a minimum 50% of the required common open space. So that's half of the 20%. So basically at least 10%.
Yes.
Must be grass. That's effectively how it is right now.
Yeah.
So are you saying that if someone put in a pickleball court or a shuffleboard court, that can be included in that number? Because it'd be recreation, but it's not grass or other suitable landscaping? Or am I misreading that? Misreading what your intentions are or what you're trying to get at?
Well, that was my concern, is if we're restricting it to grass at 50% and presuming the rest of it's landscaping, are we missing the point when we want to age in place and have cottage clusters and go to an older community that may have a different idea for a recreation? I don't see anybody jumping on it, so I can just put a big X through it. So
well,
moving on.
It's just less. When you take away open space, grass, which feels kind of fieldish, it less feels like open space.
Perfect.
It'll just come with more dense feel. Although I understand your point.
Yeah, I think there might also be some attitudes changing towards just open grass and things like that. So I favor on the area of creativity as long as it preserves the space.
Okay, I'm happy just leaving it as is. I don't have any other comments for any of the other sections. If anybody has anything else that goes into these other sections, in the back of this code. It's, energy conservation and historic resources, and then we're back at the 1614, the design standards themselves that are, I have lines going back and forth all over the place, starting on page 36 and 37. Because what I have is this the one that was at the open house?
Yes, it is. It was,
Okay.
Yes.
So let me let someone else speak to what we saw from the open house slides that Joy presented and some of the ideas that have been thrown about previously. What's your first impression? Joy, can you go to that one that has the 4A, 4B
I'm
slide?
sure. There you go.
And what's the one before it? I just want to make sure we're all reoriented.
Yeah, so
Okay, there we go. Sorry, that is it. So if we look at element 1, there's an entry location requirement, and it says the entrance has to be within 8 feet of the longest street facing. So if we look at page 37 and we look at A, which is Joy's element 1, entry location and orientation, there's the objective process and the subjective, that discretionary one. Did anybody have any comments, questions in that little section about what was going to be required and how we would implement that, or how staff would use that criteria, or any concerns? And again, I'm on page 37 or 141. No one wants to jump in. No concerns.
Well, I can't remember. Was this where some of the folks at the open house thought we were being too prescriptive? Was just too many?
Yes, every single
that section.
Every single one of these, yes.
Every single one.
Yes. Their statement were, why do you have to have a door within front 8 feet, and how do you measure 8 feet? Is it too far away from 8 feet if your door is set back 8 feet from the garage? If it's in a, setback alcove, and if a roof is over top of it, is that considered a porch? So then it's going to be covered as a door element.
Were the attendees just looking for edge cases, or are these legitimate?
They're legitimate. If you go to the go to the packet that she sent out, one of the questions came up on. Oh, I'm gonna have to find it. One of the ones that didn't pass, the door was too far back, but it had a covered awning over. Let's see.
Page 21, house 2.
Yeah, house 2 and house 4. But if you look at house 4, front entrance standards, did it not meet it because it does have an awning kind of over it? And does house 3, is it really, their question was did it count where house 4 didn't, but house 3 did? Is it because they measured it, or because there was something covering the alcove that goes back to the house? So there was a lot of question about that. And then number 2 didn't meet, but it looks like it may have a porch over top of it because it sticks out in front of it.
So I think the earlier drafts of all this happened before I was on the commission, I think. Where did a lot of this first originate from? Was there a commission meeting that went through and just made things up like this and just put it in, or was it consultants that came in and just recommended a bunch of things? Like who first suggested, oh, let's have entrance like 8 feet, like what did that stem from? How did it get in here to begin with?
So definitely we were working with a consultant, and within that consultant team definitely was an architect. And these are typical standards that we would usually see as design elements for typical homes. And I was just reviewing the very first draft that we did provide, just listed 17 elements that outside of the 3 that were standard, which is entry, location, garage, and window, there's these 17 additional details. But then, like I said before, the commission felt that the development community would choose the easier ones versus trying to meet the intent of having a home that is has some visual visual substance as far as when viewing from the pedestrian's point of view.
Okay, so there was kind of a list of typical design things that builders do, and commission kind of went through and said, yeah, we should kind of codify some of these. And one of them.
Sorta.
I mean, what things they liked, or I just no. I wasn't here. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
Just go through and just start striking things. If there was a bunch of work put into this, it's kind of weird.
Well, the first thing it came through was there were like 17 things, and we were supposed to pick 3 or 5 of them. And as a person who has seen applications come through in the commercial and industrial design standards, where they pick sometimes the simplest ones, and they're able to meet the code, even though you wish they had done something a little bit better. We wanted to ensure that they selected at least a couple from each of the key element areas. So we found through, and this is part of the open house and some of the we did a visual preference survey online, and that showed that people cared about windows, people cared about entry location, and the big thing is people cared about not having snout houses. People don't like it when the garage is the focal point of the house, and so so most of the design elements came across as making the house visually appealing, not a snout house, and pedestrian scale, windows and doors to the community, which create like, how do they call it? Windows to the neighborhood. So the eyes of the neighborhood, the windows of the house, right? Is that what it is?
Eyes on the street, having a better connection, to your neighbors, to the outside. And then I just want to point out that on the 2 houses that didn't meet the design standard for the entry location, you can see that the entry location is set back 8 or more feet, and it kind of creates that long hallway type feel, to the house. And it could, sometimes that is also a safety concern as well.
Yeah. So my thought was, we want to focus that the entrance location be to the street, but do we care if it's 8 feet from the street or 9.5 feet? So, that it faces the street is fine, that it's open to a covered porch. I mean, that it has to be one of these. The item 2 is confusing because then it has to be one of those 4, and then within one of those 4, it has to meet 4 other criteria. And so it became quite, I'm just thinking as we go to hearing and then as they implement it, is this too onerous, too complicated, or do we just roll with what's been presented?
So we've already got a requirement that doesn't let the garage extend more than 60% of the front of the house.
That's number 2, right?
So I mean, that's going to mean that even if the front door is set back a ways, there's still going to be plenty of front house to see. I'm just trying to think, why would you have a garage like this? Probably because to have the front door closer to the front of the garage, you're embedding part of the garage into the body of the house, so you get more house toward the back of the lot by doing this. I'm just wondering if maybe having the maximum width of the garage, or the maximum frontage of the garage, accomplishes almost the same thing by still making it visually seem like there's plenty of house left to see from the street. I don't know. Thoughts on that? Or otherwise, I mean, we got to set a number, and that's, it's 8 feet was the number, 9.5, 7. I don't know. But thoughts?
I agree that it's hard. Once we quote unquote fix the other part, which is that the garage is not the primary focus point of the house, then by setting it back, by default, the front door, if it faces the front, it's going to be within that realm. I can't imagine a scenario where if the garage is on the front and the house can't be, it can't be in front of the house, that it's going that the front door isn't going to be on the front of the house.
Right.
So I think the 8 foot is.
Both of these, house 2 and 4, also failed the garage design standard.
Yeah.
I'm guessing because of the length.
Yeah. Erica?
So an option here would be, you could take element 1, entry locations and orientation, and all the standards under that certain element, and move it down to the element for A. So so it's not required, but it's something that could be that a developer could choose.
Well, I think it's still okay to have it as a required element. I just don't think it needs to be as complicated as it is.
Okay.
I just think that the standard apply, let's see, at least one main entrance for each residential structure or townhouse. Actually, that has to be each residential dwelling unit, because when it comes to triplex and quad, we're going to have the same thing. Must meet the following criteria. The entrance must face the street, or in the case of cottages, face an open space.
So is it possible here, it looks like, is it possible to have a front entrance that doesn't face the street at all, but has a porch somewhere, like could be in the back, but it has a porch, so we're good? Because there's a lot of ors in here.
Yeah, I don't know.
So Joy, I think
yes.
I think we have a visual on this.
Yes.
Let's pull that up really quick. I think
it's towards the end. So let me just. There you go. This visual?
Nice.
Yes. Thank you. So this provides a visual of different examples of where the front entry location could be.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, so that's where on the right side there, that's where it would not technically face the street. That'd be the or there.
Right.
Right.
That doesn't actually solve my question, but but it does clarify how that would look.
So it has a port, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's,
Because I think part of the idea is we want the main entrance to be somewhere toward the front of the house as well. But now we're getting even more prescriptive. Add that too.
Okay. I don't know if we have an answer then. The next one is garages.
Well,
the
hang on,
front
hang on. Is
elevation.
it okay to not have an answer? I mean, don't we have to
Yes.
decide these things as a commission? I mean,
Yep.
if we don't answer it, what happens?
Well, the council's going to hear it again on the 7th. And then it's going to come back to us on hearing in October. So tonight, maybe we don't have an answer, but if 7 of us or 6 of us are all thinking about this puzzle and going, I'm not going to, it's not a hill I'm going to die on. I don't
Right.
think it's necessary for us to prescribe that it be within 8 feet of the longest front facing edge.
Right.
It seems odd, but again, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I'm throwing it out there to say, hey, maybe we just get rid of that one and then go to number 2, and that's the only element that they have to worry about. And if the rest of the commission says you're nuts, it has to be within 8 feet. In fact, if it is greater than 7.5 feet, I'm going to be offended. Then we go that way. I just don't know. I'm just saying these are things that I look at and go, I wonder why we picked 8 feet. And I don't care if it's 8 feet or 10 feet, as long as it's kind of facing the front or it has a front face feeling because there's a porch and the door opens up on the porch.
Yeah, I mean, prescribing less with getting the intent done through our requirements is key. Like if the garage standard stuff pretty much necessitates that in order to do something decent with the front anyway, then why put it in there and allow for some flexibility? Right. And I think there's also a component where we were going to do this, see how it goes for a while before it, as well. So we might have one development where we learn something, here, which, not ideal, but
yeah.
So, but I'm with you. I mean, I don't know that we need that, and maybe it'll get answered through the next section.
Yeah. The next section is garages. Front elevation, the garage can't be in front of the longest street facing elevation. Snout houses are not allowed. The width of the garage can't be more than 60% of the width of the house. And number 3 is the garage shall contain at least one of the following design features. And what came out of the open house was garages that face a street shall contain an architectural design element was allowed for lots of flexibility because we didn't prescribe what it was. We just said there was an architectural feature such as a trellis, a window, or multi-material finish as examples, but it created just that one thing from the open house was we can take out 5 things that they have to pick one and put in an option that says contains an architectural design feature.
So just a note here, these standards have to be clear and objective. So when staff has to determine if an architectural feature is similar to what was listed, there's some discretion that's tied to that.
In the open house, there's a few points in the notes here in the packet where feedback was just more options.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any, I know you had a slide from a developer that was on one of them, but was there any, did they offer any ideas? I mean, we're just community folks coming up with these as well. Do they have further thoughts on some of those?
Well, the first thought was a natural wood finish. The first time the guy paints it, it is no longer in compliance, and the code is not going, there's no code officer going to come up and tell him to strip the paint off his house.
Right.
So another option was, what did he, yeah, I don't remember what the other options were that were available for the garage doors, but prescriptive of 5. I heard what Joy's saying, that it had, an architectural design feature that has to be compared to another thing is discretionary, but that seems.
I guess I don't see how that's any different than then selecting for, okay, we're already saying pick from this menu, right? And if, to me, it feels the same way. We're saying here's a menu of architectural design features, and you have to pick a certain number of them. How is that any different than saying you have to meet 5 criteria?
So, I mean, that's true. We could list, design criteria for a garage door that people could choose from. Windows, trellis, 2 different design materials. I don't know. We would have to come up with, we could come up with some more.
I was trying to get away from a prescriptive list and saying that it has to contain an architectural design feature, including, or for example, windows on 15%. And you could use these as examples, but it must contain an architectural design feature and then allow people flexibility to choose from the list that's selected, or if they have a similar, I mean,
is that clear and objective enough? So that's the problem here. Is I get what people want, flexibility, but we're going to have design standards, and they must be clear and objective. You almost have to prescribe, unless you just leave it totally open, or just say or maybe we make a list of here's things we don't want or something.
If you list it, staff can identify that they meet it. If you suggest that it can be this, or as an example would be this, it makes it really hard for staff to say, is it similar enough to meet that standard? So that's where discretion takes hold.
Okay, so maybe we don't have a good answer tonight, but I was throwing it out from what we had heard, and it wasn't just one person saying this thing about garages. There were several people saying the more flexibility you have, the more success it's going to be for the community.
I mean, what are we trying to not do with that requirement? Just have sameness in the garages? We've already got this one with minimum or maximum width. So what is it we're trying to avoid with this section, I think, is the question.
That's a good one.
And then maybe we write things to specify that.
Yeah, if I had to guess, it was we're trying to avoid the look, right? It's not, it's that the garage is the major feature, architectural feature of the housing, and that kind of has gone out of style and fashion.
Yeah, but we can't eliminate the garage.
Right.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is I think that's what those at the meeting, I mean, I've heard that before as well. They don't like it when the garage takes up, 70% of the forward view of the house, right? So if they turn it to the side and make it, or set it back a little bit, isn't that what we're trying to say?
That's the 60%. That's already in there.
Okay.
This is now like what it kind of looks like from the street. Maybe we're avoiding a sameness, I guess.
So page 38, the third element in garages. So there's 3 elements. One, it has to be not in front of the plane of the front door, and then it can't be more than 60%, and it also has to have one of these 5 design elements in it. And is the purpose of the design element to not have one ginormous white wall of door? Is that now necessary now that we have this? So I don't know if we have an answer tonight, so maybe we just move on if no one else has any other input to help.
Not if you have to be super specific. That's the challenge here. That's the challenge. I agree with your principle, but you can't codify that. Can't look like your neighbors exactly. Well,
Also, Also, it can't be just one color and blank. Yeah, that's
Maybe
hard.
there's some version of that we can work in here. I think we need to ruminate on this more.
Okay.
And also remember, we're going to be testing these out, for 6 months and coming back to you, with the report of what's working, what's not working. What do you like out there that is being built? What don't you like out there?
Now that the hearings have been pushed back, we're only going to have a couple, 3-4 months, right?
Well,
yeah.
We need just to get in a car and drive around neighborhoods and take notes.
Yeah. So the next element of one of 3 that is required is windows. And this is a 15%, we're on page 38, 15% of the area street facing must include windows. And so there were some questions about energy efficiency and creativity by adjusting it from just 15% of glazing to 20% with the trim, shutters, and an architectural element. And so I just throw it out there to see. Erica, you have your hand raised?
sorry.
That's okay. It's still raised.
This is where you were saying maybe it doesn't have to actually be the glass, but it can be the other components of the window.
Correct.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
As long as then, okay, yeah, seems reasonable, and it seems like we could accommodate energy efficiency and creativity. Yeah, that's what I was going for. Councilor Scott, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I really like the way you were going with this and not having it be restricted to windows and really encompass, I'd almost say anything that's not siding should count, right? So if it's not siding, it counts, but the percentage has to be much higher, right? It has to be 30, 25, I don't know, somewhere in that range to me. And you're talking about, windows, gutters, trim,
the belly bands,
a roof, detail, one of those like porthole, like vent porthole thing. Anything that's not siding should count toward your calculation, and then the percentage should be maybe 30 or 35 or something.
Yeah. And what do they call it when they, like in Old Town, where you have to have a bottom, a middle, and a top? What's the bottom? Is the footing or you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So like if you had, that like brick, kind of fake brick facade at the base of your house, that would count towards your percentage, right? Because it's not siding.
Well, I like the concept, but I'm not sure I'd go as high as 35. That's a lot of coverage on a wall on the side of a house. That means a full third of the side of your house is something other than siding, and siding exists for a reason. It protects the interior of the house, and you add a lot of windows and various things, a lot to maintain. There's room for water leakage. You'd be caulking like crazy for the next 10 years. I agree with the concept. I just don't know I'd go that high on the percentage.
Well, could it be a mix? Could you say, hey, we're going to do, 15, 20% windows or 30% of other materials besides siding? Because if you're going to do brick, right, or a wainscot or something like that with, then it's like, well, it would look natural to do a third, kind of around. But I get where you're coming. You don't want it to be crazy, but keep in mind, people are going to be doing houses that sell, right? They're trying to, make them attractive to the target audience they're going after. So they're not going to.
I think if you go around any house built in Sherwood in very recently in the last 20 years, and you looked at the front of the house and you took a picture of it and you calculated what percentage of that is not siding, you're gonna find that's pretty high. Between all the windows and the awnings and shutters and trim and belly bands and everything else, it's probably about a third or maybe higher even.
For the
I don't know what
front,
the right number is either. I'm not saying it has to be 35. I'm just saying it has to be much higher than 15.
And then maybe we reserve the 15% for those corner lots on the side. Or something
Okay.
less.
That was I forgot it was mentioning only street facing is what it was talking about. Okay,
Right.
that's more clear. Yeah, I was thinking like sides of the house and stuff like that, having to just put a bunch of random stuff on there.
Yeah. And
Yeah, totally agree with you there.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yep.
perfect. So Joy, are you able to codify or draft something for that idea? And what we have to have is 2 or 3 examples with the percentages lined out as staff would do it in a pre-app meeting or whatever, to say, okay, we were going to look at the Second Street application that came in and say, what percentage of this front street and what percentage of the side do we like it, or is it enough? And then maybe pick a couple others so that we know. It's really hard to say 35%. What does that look like? I think that Councilor Scott had done something with the window picture that we were looking at before, that we kept saying 15% window, and the picture that was next to it was like 27 or 28%. And so we need to have true window demonstrations of what 15 or 30% is. Commissioner Vance?
This might actually solve our garage problem as well. If we're extending this to beyond just windows and calling it the front of the house, if somehow we can work in the garage as space here, if the garage is included in the front of the house percentage space and we up the percentage, it might incent alternative design creativity within the garage as well. And now we don't need to specify item 3 under the garages.
There you
That
go.
solves an issue.
If design elements within the garage, they count towards your percentage, is that what you're saying?
35% or whatever. If you need to manipulate the garage somehow with some extra flair to hit your 35, we've solved the garage design problem.
Perfect. That's great.
And are
All
you
right.
saying we're counting everything except for a
Like
plain white flat garage door?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if someone put windows in it, or a trellis, or if they use, something. Okay. So then
Developers are going to build things that sell. They're not going to make awkward, weird looking things on the garage, and this gives some freedom.
yeah. And then
Hopefully, anyway.
hopefully, yeah.
You never know, but I guess.
I think some things might be hard to quantify in a percentage for design elements. And this is something that we're going to have to look into is, for example, those decorative eave cornices. How would we measure those as a percentage?
Well, and that could be just porches, entry, or no, what is it? Roof elements. Just add it as an option in the section 4B.
Okay.
That's not part of the percentage. That's an option they can do.
Right.
So instead of percentage, are we going also to a point of identifying maybe 5 elements?
No, I don't think so. Go back to the slide. Sorry. They're probably at either ends of your presentation, unfortunately.
Yes, that's fine.
And I have a gnat that is driving me nuts.
All right, here we go.
So entry location we've discussed, garages we've discussed, windows and 15 to 20%. And then there's 5 elements. And they have to pick a porch element from the list.
Yeah.
Or a roof element from the list, and a roof element and a window element. And then there are 2 other places that they can get points so that they have a total of
8.
8 design elements, 3 required, 5 optional in any assorted combination. As long as they have an A, a B, and a C, then they can do 5. Okay. It's unfortunate that they have to be so prescriptive because the belly band is not in here anyplace, but
we can definitely add additional elements to, let's see here, like building materials. We could add belly band.
That
We
needs to
can
be
add for window elements. We can add oh my goodness, it's 9 o'clock at night. I'm forgetting my words. the
decorative
Like
decorative
those,
eave braces.
Or what about like those fake patios?
Yes. So we can definitely add more design elements into our list for people to choose from to add that extra added flexibility that we've talked about this evening.
Yeah, it feels like that for B other elements, you could just create quite a list in there. Or if it doesn't fit in one of the other categories.
Right.
Would the list be definitive or would it be open to other ideas if we didn't include something that a builder came up with?
It'd have to come in under subjective then, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But it would give us an opportunity, maybe, once every couple of years, you come revisit the list and add new things, that have come up through that subjective process.
Exactly.
Or after 6 months when we're going to reevaluate. And, we definitely will be hearing from the development community of what's missing on the list.
So on the building materials, horizontal lap siding, I'm not sure about whether that's important because someone else said that there are other things that are becoming more popular, that it's not necessarily only horizontal.
Yeah, there's a comment, I think, about modern farmhouse and being vertical.
Yes.
On their siding.
Mm-hmm. And then I think brick, cedar, stucco, they said stucco you'd never do, was one of the comments I heard. But 40% of the street-facing facade, that seems excessive because I would think that if we're going to count a belly band, and that's only that much, we might count a 20% brick bottom or that new rock face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think 40% seems excessive. So if anybody else has ideas or thoughts, we can throw them in there at the next draft. But and then the next part is that the house plan variety, it's just subdivisions. It just means that the house next to it there's not going to be 2 houses side by side that are the same. And we're prohibiting T11, vinyl, and aluminum. And we're adding a limitation on parking that it is not allowed in the front yard. Which, if we have landscaping minimums, is going to preclude that anyway, isn't it? So probably not So we're,
No cars parked on blocks.
Say that again?
No cars parked on blocks, front yard.
Yeah, something like that. We need to fix figure 6 on page 45 so that that picture represents 15%. Or if we're changing it to a different percentage, change out the window elements for a window with shutter or an awning or something so that it is representative of the percent that we end up with in the code.
What page are you on?
Sorry, page 45. I just kept flipping because this is the thing we kept looking at where they were saying 15% window coverage, but if you measure this out, that is significantly more than 15%, and so it's just deceptive in what it is.
Yeah, but we're going to up into that now anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, and I thought we were going away from it being strictly windows and more to being 15% non-siding, non-garage door. Yeah.
So change it to be like pictures of windows with shutters or something.
Streamers.
Yes.
I think it would be really helpful to, like, if the diagram can represent. I still think you need to have whatever the let's say we say 30% is the right number, 30% non-siding, right? You need to have 3 pictures. You need to have one that this is 30%, this is more, this is less, and maybe the picture itself can be shaded to highlight the percentage that counts toward, so everything that's not siding in a garage door counts towards your percentage, and those 2 things don't, and so it kind of gives a really visual clue.
And I thought didn't we agree that if they do an upgraded garage door or an architecturally interesting garage door that does count, or did I miss that being taken out?
No.
Yeah, I think we're saying if it's a plain garage door, it doesn't count. If it's an upgraded garage door or parts of the garage door are upgraded, that it does.
Okay.
All right. Does anybody else have any comments? As I go further into this, Allie, the next comment was from the mayor during the council work session, was on page 49. There was just a concern about the alley-loaded garages are only set back 5 feet from the alley instead of 20 feet. So I just wanted to put it up to the commission to say there was a concern about alley-loaded garage and how much space is from the garage to the alley and whether or not it's sufficient.
And what is an alley-loaded garage? What does that mean?
So if you go to the down past Target, there's the houses that the front door is on the street, but there's no garage, and you access it from the back, so they're alley loaded.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And so the setback requirement is that the back of the house in that case would be 5 feet from the alley, and that's I'm not sure if
the house itself would be 5 feet setback from the edge of the alley. Is that?
Yes.
Is
your house is 5 feet from the alley.
Yeah.
And then
I guess I think of an alley as skinny road with kind of walls, but I guess it could just be a skinny road with dirt, I suppose, on either side.
Or a 20-foot setback from the alley, so it has a little bit of space for parking and trash cans and other elements.
Without larger property lots, though, that means a smaller house, right? Smaller livable space in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like, everywhere I've ever seen an alley loaded garage, they've been close to the alley. I've never seen a 20-foot setback in a place that I don't think that would be viable. right? I think you'd essentially be legislating away that type of construction, I think, because to Rick's point, you're gonna push it's already narrow because it's a townhome most likely, or a very similar, and you have your front yard setback, and now you're gonna have a 20 foot backyard setback. You're not gonna have a building envelope that makes the project viable anymore.
Right. I'm only expressing what was brought up at the meeting by the mayor, and if there was an idea that we needed to vet out, I just wanted to throw it out there so it doesn't get kicked back to us that we did something, or the council does something on the fly, because it's
I mean, it feels to me like an attempt to just ban townhomes, and I don't understand that.
okay.
Well, and in reality, what we're trying to say when we're trying to give different options for housing is we're saying if you do not want a house with a big backyard because you're wanting to do common front area or the cottage style housing or all of these other things, it has to give somewhere, or we're going to have tall, skinny houses that nobody likes, right? So we're just shifting it. We got to be a little flexible in our definition there.
And especially when we're thinking about a townhome, right? If your garage can't take up more than X percentage of your frontage, we've essentially made it almost impossible to have a garage in the front of a townhome.
Right.
And so you have to have it in the back, and therefore it has to be alley loaded. And now if you also then say, oh, and then by the way, you got to push it 20 feet back off the street, this is not a viable building project anymore. I don't know. That seems very onerous to me.
I agree too. Okay. I was just trying to, I made a note of it from his comments and what was said at the council work session. I wanted to.
If I can make one more comment, it'd be that maybe there's a way to solve parking challenges for those neighborhoods if we looked at maybe an 8-foot setback or a 10-foot setback possibly. So finding, is there room to negotiate there to where it's still a viable building project but can, create an extra parking spot potentially.
And that's a good idea.
But I think you have to go to at least the 14 feet to get a parking spot.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? The next part is all about the cottage clusters, and I think we're done through the whole residential design standards. At least one pass. I know there's sections that we don't have a perfect answer on. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm just thinking about, kind of still thinking about this townhome parking situation, and I go back to Villebois and the way that they've handled that, because they have a lot of rear-loaded house garages with no driveways, but they have really wide streets with parallel parking all along the street. And so I think that has to be part of our solution. I don't know how we get there. I know this is out of the scope of this residential design standards, but I think that, it's not even like on-street parking like our neighborhoods, right? It's like there's those cutouts, those parking carve-outs that really make the street really, really wide, but it allows for a lot of parking. I think we have to figure out how to do that.
That's really, and I think for where we're at within the existing Sherwood city limits, not going to be as challenged as we are as when we expand to Sherwood West. So we may have grace of time to be able to say, when the TSP comes before us and before Sherwood West comes into our city limits, we need to solve this on-street parking and road width situation. Does that seem viable?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, the other thing on the townhomes, that rear setback, making it not a viable project. If we codified something like that and pretty much excluded that whole housing type, I don't know if that would get us into hot water with the intent of the law. I mean, and I don't think we necessarily want to just never have townhomes in Sherwood. I just think we would rather have been able to put them where we want them, and now we're kind of stuck. Not we're trying to find a balance. So I agree. We probably shouldn't have to go any further out. Yeah.
And I think the if you make townhomes, hard for people to build, the what you could get instead could be less desirable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, are we ready to move forward to next steps?
Well, there was a couple other things that kind of came up that I noticed in the comments. I don't even know, might be just worth commenting on and mentioning, but somebody mentioned elevators for elderly quadplexes. I don't know if I thought that was kind of interesting. Seems very challenging to put that into anything.
That would be building code, not design code anyway, so it's kind of out of our hands.
Okay,
Yeah.
interior, so that's out of our scope. And then windows not facing into a neighbor's home. That was an interesting comment.
Privacy concerns.
Yeah, I don't know how to not do that for some of the more dense buildings in all cases. I don't know if that's something that we can even try to figure out.
Well, remember
realize-
that we're not regulating windows on that interior side yard between
Oh, right.
two residential units. We're only looking at the windows that face,
Face the front.
a public right of way.
Okay.
And I kind of feel like the internal privacy windows between houses comes back to the developer wanting to build projects that sell. And it's kind of their problem to solve, not ours to legislate.
I
Okay.
concur.
Yeah. I felt like we should mention them since they came up, talk about them. The only thing I had was on the existing homes expansions. For a long time I couldn't actually find the new language, and I think I just found it. And so it looks like we switched from like the 200 square feet to a 50% increase is the threshold. Is that?
What page are you on?
I'm on page 36. C2, so 16.14.010 C2, expansions and conversions of residential structures. So these would be existing homes. What are the requirements? And it's been kind of a big topic, and so I just wanted to make sure that we looked at it because I think this is new, at least since the last time I saw it. In the commentary that was in our packet, it mentioned that maybe they'd go 40%. And I noticed that this is 50%. So if it adds more than 50%, so that means if you have a smaller house, 1,000 square foot house, you can add on 500 square feet and not have to deal with any of the design standards, basically. But if you go over 500 square feet, now this part I might not get right, but what do you have to do? Like redesign your home, or just that new section? What's the rule? So first of all, is 50% right? I was originally thinking maybe a greater of some square footage number or 50%, but 50% is pretty good. That's pretty substantial, even for a small house. So that one, I think the idea is you don't want to totally like rebuild your entire home or double or triple its size and not have to comply with anything. I think that's kind of the idea. 50% is pretty generous, but what happens if it's over that?
Right, and think about this is that you're only applying the design elements to those faces or those walls that face the public street.
Okay.
As well. So are you really gonna build a new 500 square foot extension on the front of your house? You probably don't have the setback to do that, but.
Mm-hmm.
So what do they have to do, I think is the question. So in my case, I can add 10 feet to the side of my house, and I can go back however many feet, and that could add 50% to my house. So now I have a expansion area that is on the front, and if I were on the corner lot, the side? What do I have to do under those circumstances?
Two A says the expansion or conversion shall include design elements that bring the overall street-facing facade closer to conformance. And it can't bring it further out of compliance. So it looks like they only have to do the expansion has to now meet. But does that mean all the percentages and stuff apply to only that new expansion section?
Yes.
Would, yes.
And only if you trigger 50% add-on. I mean, my bent is to mostly leave existing homeowners alone, other than if you really are turning your property into a whole different kind of property. I think that's a different deal. So, but I think 50% will, I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? The right number for existing homeowners?
That's quite a big increase. A lot of what's been built in Sherwood already, except for some of the, I guess I think of it as in a couple areas, like most of the Woodhaven and the stuff that was built in the boom years, the 90s to now. Most of those houses are built on lots that there's not enough to go 50%. So we're probably not going to be impacting a large percentage of the houses that are already in Sherwood. In the other areas in Sherwood that were built prior to the 90s, they're on very large lots. And so we could be asking someone that has a 1,100 square foot house, if they were going to double it to make an ADU or do something like that. I guess I agree that 50%, it seems like a large number, but it's also probably appropriate, it seems like to me, because if they double the size, then there's, okay, yeah, 50% or more, they need to come into compliance. If they're just taking 1,000 square foot house and making it a 1,200 square foot house, they don't have to comply with the code at all, correct?
Correct.
So
that's,
I mean, that feels kind of right to me. I mean, if you're adding 50% to the size of your house, you're spending a considerable amount. I mean, this is a significant project. It's you're building a whole new house for, in some ways. So I feel like that in that scenario, it's not unreasonable to ask someone to come into compliance.
Okay. And 50%, what is that? The total square footage of the expansion, or just an additional 50% of the visible
street facing? Yeah, 50% of area to any street-facing facade.
So measured by length and height, square footage?
So if I add a second floor, I'm going to have to match the code. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking if you expanded the house out, like maybe, I don't know, 10 feet by 10 feet high or whatever, but then went way back into the backyard, that's a lot of square footage, but you've really only added 100 square feet to the front face of the street.
Right. So it's only 50% of the area to any street facing facade. So we don't look at the back.
So if you're looking at the front of your house and it's 50 feet wide and 20 feet tall, then that's 1,000 square feet, if I'm doing my math correctly. Then you'd have to be adding 500 more square feet of frontage to trigger. So I mean, that's a lot. I feel like very unlikely that would get triggered in most expansions.
Yeah, the only trigger would be corner lots if they added that expansion on a corner lot. And
potentially.
But again, that would be an entire street facing, and at that point, you're building so much linear footage that you're already invested in a major development.
Yeah, I think the code would be accomplishing what we want, right? We don't want someone to be able to essentially redevelop their entire house into in a whole new house and then get away and escape the code.
Right.
Yeah.
But existing homeowners have the right to do a lot with their own property and not be burdened by something. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think the intent is to make it an extraordinary circumstance. You got to be doing something really major to overhaul your property to trigger having to comply with all these new guidelines that are really there for new development stuff, you know. And so, you know, otherwise, most folks who just own a home aren't going to pay any attention to this code, probably for the most part. At least they wouldn't otherwise. My only other comment is that I know the order of the language in the paragraph. It's after it says expansions of existing structures or conversions that add more than 50%. So it's not any conversion. It's the conversion itself to a duplex or a triplex has to also meet the 50%. So, because my thought was the 50% is basically for existing, but if you convert it all to a duplex or a triplex, then it should probably trigger. You seeing what I'm saying here?
Oh, I see. I hadn't read it that way.
To me, it reads like expansions of existing residential structures or conversions into these other things that add more than 50%. So it's not just converting from a single family to a duplex or a triplex that triggers it. It would also have to be a 50% expansion to trigger it.
Yeah.
My thought would be, yeah, go ahead.
So the way it's written now, if you just took your existing structure and converted it to a duplex, doesn't trigger the code. You'd have to basically do an expansion also.
Right.
And what you're proposing is that a conversion should trigger it no matter what, even if there's no expansion.
Because you're completely changing the housing type. That's at least my initial thought.
Okay.
And Erica's raising her hand.
Yeah, but it's internal. You're making that internal conversion to a duplex. I just want to bring that up.
I think
You're not necessarily, making a person would.
Like it doesn't change the way the house looks significantly, right? So.
But it did.
Right.
But it does affect parking and all the other stuff potentially.
Yeah, and we're coming up on that other bill that just got passed that prohibits HOAs from, disallowing conversions and stuff. I mean, this might be an opportunity to have some code in here that protects surrounding homeowners as well from changes to properties if they not only have to change, but they also have to now update every piece of design on the house. Maybe that's less likely to happen.
So I read it. I didn't read it like you're reading it, but I would say expansions of a house by 50%, you're not changing the nature of the use of the house. If you're converting it from a single family to a duplex, you have now changed the nature of the house.
Different housing type.
You're expanding it by 50%. That should be a trigger. I hear what you're saying.
Well, I think what he's saying is that it should trigger even if you don't expand it at all.
That's correct.
Right here.
I think if you're keeping the same nature of the house, it should be 50%. But if you're going to change your house into a duplex or a triplex, regardless of whether or not you're expanding, maybe that should trigger complying with design standards because now you're changing the whole housing type, which is kind of the whole point of the design standards. And I think that puts a little more burden on the owner as well in the interest of kind of protecting the community from suddenly converting your house to a quadplex in the middle of everybody else living around you. If you have to also pony up that cost. Yes.
So I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical here.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a 2-story house that I'm converting into a duplex. I open up the front door. There's an internal stairway that leads up to one unit. And on the bottom floor, there's another door that you would open and it would utilize the bottom floor for a unit. So I'm not doing anything to the exterior of the house. It looks like the single family house that's always been there. But now I have 2 units, and I have just changed the internal function of the house. You would say to a property owner that you would need to put in the design standards in place.
That is
Well,
a good.
or at least be reviewed, because here's my support of that statement is you've just now added potentially double the number of cars and family members and stuff like that into the same living space, right? And so it is not just about the internal use. It has to be changed to now a duplex.
But
So-
none of those things have anything to do with design.
I was going to say you haven't triggered a building permit. You haven't done anything that would allow the city to do it. So it would need to be. I see it breaking into 2 things: an expansion of an existing dwelling at 50%, or a conversion that changes the exterior at all. So the conversion that Erica did, they didn't change the outside. It has nothing to do with design elements. But if in her scenario they had to add a second access, that has to come through, because that wouldn't change it by 50%, but it would change the nature of the house, and it could look awkward if they've all of a sudden put a stairwell. If I put a second, if I had a second story and all of a sudden I put a stairwell on the outside of my house, and so I could get my house split, and now my neighbors have to look at that stairwell, I think that should trigger design criteria. Yes.
Right, but so if we're making it, the thing I'm worried about is it feels like we're almost incentivizing people to not change the exterior at all, rather than changing it appropriately, right? If it's too expensive for me to update the look of the house because I'm changing the windows from having panes to having no panes, and it's an updated, now more modern look, that now means that I've triggered to review all the design standards. And so I'd rather just have the older dated look and just leave that, so that I don't change anything from the outside when I change my insides. You know what I mean? Are we incentivizing correctly? Because it seems like you're then encouraging people, hey, don't update the outside of your house.
Well, only when you're converting the house to a duplex or a triplex or something like that. I mean, if you're just yeah,
I don't know. I worry about the alignment on its head, but I'm not enough. That's not a hill I want to die on. But
so I'd like to hear. I'd also like to get some input from council, because they're going to see this again. But I hear where Commissioner Vance is going, because if a single family residence increases its size but not its nature, that is exactly what we don't want to burden a dwelling person with. But if they're changing it, the use and the capacity and the burden on the neighbors, then if they change the outside of the house, then they should be making sure they meet the design criteria, and they don't just slap up a set of stairs without any thought to what it looks like.
I get that point. My only concern with this is that, I mean, this conversation is definitely flowing into HB 2001 land. And my concern is the legal aspect of this, right? Is this going to be perceived as unreasonable barriers to, because we may not like conversions, or we may not want conversions to be incentivized, but the state of Oregon absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
They want conversions. They want, people to turn their single family houses into duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes. And if they're seeing us put up what they consider to be unreasonable barriers to those conversions, then, I'm concerned about that coming back on us.
I mean, if you want to build a duplex on your property, you got to conform to design standards. To me, that's pretty simple. I can see the dispute.
I agree with you. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, or where we
I know
have
what you're
to be
saying.
careful. Yeah,
I get it. Yeah, I get it. Maybe this is one of those things we mull over. And Eric, I hear your comment too. And there's people that like, yeah, if they have a separate floor, people rent it from them or something. I get it. Which is why I kind of like Chair Simpson's your idea of, it would also have to be like, maybe it gets triggered by like a building permit application. They're going to actually do something to really convert the house formally. Now you have to comply. I don't know. Okay, well, it was a thought I have on this. So.
I agree, and I had not read that the way you did, and I'm so thankful you brought that up, because I think there's an opportunity for us to make sure we are, at the end, doing no harm to the community. And I think we have to ask if the state is going to push back or not. But if we don't ask for it, we won't know. So. Well,
I mean, what was that new bill that got passed that we talked about a month ago? I mean, that's exactly what Councilor Scott's talking about. I mean, they wrote a bill that says that HOAs can't prohibit homeowners from converting their property. The intent is very clear. It doesn't matter what your neighbors say or want. You, the homeowner, you can just convert it into a quadplex and your neighbors suck it up. That's the idea. And I think that if we build design standards to be very broad and applicable to all cases, it is a legal question. No question about it. I don't know.
It's been duly noted.
I think it comes down to risk, risk tolerance, and also like if we try it and get slapped down, then okay, we get slapped down. But there's not a lot of risk in trying.
I agree. We have to push back when we can.
Yeah.
And I think if we phrase it if we couch it in terms of like exterior changes that are either, facing a public right of way or a neighbor, right? So if someone puts a stairway in the back that doesn't face a neighbor or the public right of way, maybe that's okay. If they put it facing their neighbor's house where the stairway looms over the window, or the street, obviously, then that's a different story.
I think it encroaches into the side yard setback.
Well, yeah.
That would be a case where they would want to encroach into the side yard setback, and a variance or an adjustment would be.
But maybe their house already is. Maybe it's an older house and it is a setback 10 feet now, even though the zone is only 5, and they could build a staircase without the setback. But we'd still want that to probably trigger a review. So.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. More things.
Great point.
That's it for me. I don't have anything else.
That last one was tricky. Thank you.
I was waiting for it all night going, oh, great.
You sandbag those tricky ones to the end, right?
Yeah, right about the 3 hour and 15-minute mark. That's key.
That's key. That way you can slide that right in and no one's going to notice it.
Oh, God.
Oh, I didn't even think about calling for a break or a recess or letting someone run away screaming if they needed to at this point. So
I thought this meeting would be, honestly, I thought it'd be much shorter than I figured. We've looked at this like 8 times. We're just going to, nope. It's been a productive evening. I'll say that. It's been very good.
This is very productive, and the staff took a lot of what we did at the last meeting, and so this section was really new for all the commissioners. So it was a lot. Thank you for sticking it out, because I think our hearings and the rest of the process should be fairly straightforward, because it seems like we've probably boiled it down to about 3 or 4 key ideas that we just need to see if council wants to provide any direction on, or we just as a commission land someplace. So wait, anybody else have any comments, questions, answers? I don't see anybody raising their hands. All right, good. Commissioner Wadola.
Did we ever figure out where to add or what we wanted to do with Councilor Scott's recommendation regarding garage infringements? So for the internal part of the garage, or is that not for this conversation?
It is absolutely in this garage. It is in this conversation. So it should be in B. Yeah. I'm sorry. On page 37, the B, garages and off-street parking. I think we might, it just has to be a fourth element or substitute. We kind of vetted out the third element about these architectural design features by including them in our 35%. And maybe we just substitute in, or we add a 4 that says minimum garage dimensions as were in Joy's slideshow.
Right.
Okay. All right, just once we got that noted. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, sorry. All right, excellent. Very, very good meeting. Very productive. Hope we didn't lose anybody along the way. We're all here and still awake.
Hopefully it's just temporary.
Temporary?
We don't want to lose anybody permanently.
No, heavens, no. This is a very strong commission. We've got a lot of good knowledge base and kind of exciting times right now. So, staff, have any more questions? That my cat has a concern, but does anybody else have any? The staff, did we answer all the questions or get anything drafted that we need, that you need from us to proceed?
Uh-oh, Joy, we can't hear you.
I had to take, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know. Here, let me.
You're kind of faint.
Sorry about that. So, my phone was dying, so I had to unplug myself.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah. So, the timeline is in front of you. We definitely, like stated before, there's another joint work session with City Council scheduled for September 7th. At this time, it's tentative, just because their work session schedule is really full. So we're trying to confirm that. Let's see, what else is happening as far as next steps. Definitely, possibly more additional work sessions with you as far as the commission, just to try to finalize the direction that you guys gave us today or tonight. We're definitely tabling the Robin Hood Festival. So that's another public engagement opportunity. And then planning commission hearings will start in October.
Excellent. So for the commission, work session ideas, do you want to see the entire packet all over again, or just what's the best way to communicate for the next version of this? If we, anybody have any ideas?
So what happens next is, yeah, so the council work session. So, okay, so Joy, Erica, are you guys going to take some of our comments and like try to rewrite sections and just give it to council at their working session? Or are you just going to go over with them what we talked about here? And what happens specifically there?
So I think Joy and I need to go through your comments tonight and separate the issues that we want council input on, and then break out the issues that we can write new, draft new code language for. And so what I think moving forward, we have a work session scheduled for the 24th of this month. I think we can come back to that work session, at least with some of the items that we've talked about tonight that Joy and I can draft some language for your review. And then we kind of press out with those larger concepts that we need council input on, and we'll get that council input in September.
So are you thinking that at the 24th ones, you will take all the notes that we've had and just reprint the whole chapter that we're going to be reviewing? Or are you going to create another separate document?
Well, I guess what would you prefer us? What would you prefer? Would you prefer us to manipulate the draft document as it is now, or would you like for us to produce a separate document that kind of highlights what you've talked about tonight with some different alternatives?
What's the commission's wish? To see this document in final draft form, or not?
I would like to review any changes. I mean, I feel like we've read this a lot and we've been over this a bunch. There's obviously a lot in this huge stack here that we've all pretty much settled on that I don't think we need to go back over and over again. So maybe just the certain sections that you've taken a stab at writing, we can see some alternative language for it. I mean, sure, maybe as an addendum, put in like a potential final or something like that. But I think there's going to be a couple areas where there's like optional code as well. So your written packet, maybe just highlight, okay, here's the areas, all the things that have changed since you last reviewed this. Here they are, and here are the options. What do you think?
Perfect.
Yeah. And many of the items definitely are in 16.14, the design elements.
Yeah.
So that definitely will make it easier for us, especially since you guys haven't landed on specifics and want examples. Then we can make decisions from there. Then we can move those forward.
Since we're bringing back 16.14, could you? I think, for me, just seeing that one section complete and then an attachment with the alternatives would be helpful.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any comments what their preference would be? Well,
I would prefer it be digital. I don't know if that was said, but for me personally, you can do paper for others, but I can search a digital PDF and see it just as easily.
Great.
Okay. It will also be provided.
Either one. I can always print off, sections I need to read if I need to.
Okay. All right.
I do typically like hard copies, though. I spend a lot of time staring at computer screens, and sometimes with large documents, it's easier just to read it and mark it up. So I appreciate you guys doing that. Not everybody likes the paper, and I don't. There's a lot of electronic stuff in my world today, but sometimes big documents just easier for me personally.
So yeah, if we could take a poll, because I prefer paper. Commissioner Bance is paper. Commissioner Giles is electronic. Commissioner Widola, which is your?
Honestly, I like both because I do like a printed copy I can mark up, but when you have a 178-page document, however big this was, using the functions and the search capabilities in an electronic version is much easier to navigate. So I prefer both.
Okay. Commissioner Brown?
I mean, I prefer the online one just because I can save it onto my desktop.
Okay, perfect. So if you don't want paper for these next work sessions, then I'm hearing that Commissioner Giles and Commissioner Brown don't need the printed copy sent out.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you. And then Commissioner Vance, can you restate that? So you want to see a separate document with the options, right?
Yeah, I think kind of a executive summary of sorts, maybe not quite that concise, but something that just sort of outlines, here's the sections that we've changed since we last met, or at least of those sections, there's this alternative verbiage for those. And like I said, an addendum that has the whole final thing with maybe highlights on the stuff that hasn't been decided for reference, that's fine. But
Yep.
that makes it really clear, like, here's the stuff that we have outstanding that we hadn't decided on yet that we needed to go through. Make it very clear.
All right, thank you. All right, any other hand raises or comments? And we are having a meeting on August 24th. And are there any hearings scheduled at that time?
There are no public hearings scheduled for that evening. We do have a tentative public hearing scheduled for the following, let's see here. We're moving into September. The first planning commission in September, which is actually September 14th. We have a tentative hearing that scheduled for that night.
Okay.
And I'll be sending out an updated calendar to all of you later this week.
I will not be present for the August 24th meeting. I'll be out of town.
Okay. So anytime you're absent, you have the opportunity to get the packet and send in any written comments, and Erica, make sure that we get them, right?
Right.
All right.
And
Okay.
are these are online going forward at this point again, right? And we're in person. Is that the things that got developed?
We had one. We got.
Yeah.
And I missed it.
Commissioner Widola and I got to be in person.
And how long was that meeting?
30 minutes.
Now we know who the people dragging us down are.
Oh,
Hey,
Oh, that's like
I barely said anything.
I'm sorry. I was waiting all night to get that jab in.
I know it's my fault. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well, it is really late and it has been a lot of work, and I know that we will have a better result because of it. So appreciate extra time, and I look forward to a very short recap at our 24th meeting. Commissioner Bantz, one
Just
more?
one more question. What's happening with the replacement of Commissioner Harsh? Is there any headway there?
Excellent
Remaining
question.
commissioner?
So we haven't received any applications yet, but we're going out and we're going to do another online social media kind of push to get the word out.
I think
Okay.
we should. Can we recruit some of the people that said that we were just rubber stamping everything that the city says? It seemed like there were some people at our last meeting that had some definite feelings about our job performance.
Well, Commissioner Giles, I'll let you reach out to them.
I'm just saying, if they knew how much reading material there is on this, I don't know that they would give us such a hard time.
I think that gentleman in question actually served on the planning commission back in the day.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
I know. I feel like wearing a big T-shirt that says House Bill 2001 or something. My hands are tied by.
It's not my fault.
There's only so much I can do. Talk to your senator. Anyway.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you again. And seeing no other hands raised, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much, everyone.